started. Could you start the recording, please? And then we will call the meeting to order.
You should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Council, I'd like to call this regular Council meeting of February 23rd, 2021 to order with the adoption of the agenda, and I would like to add a late item report. This is for the grant application for floodplain mapping, which we'd like to designate as item 11F. So if someone would like to adopt the agenda, including that, Councillor Rind, seconded by Councillor Schiller. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of January 26, 2021. Someone want to adopt those, please? Councillor Brooks Hill, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to business arising from those minutes, January 26, 2021. Seeing none, we're going to move on to item 5, Development Services Development Variance Permit 2020-04. So we have a presentation, Mr. Simon, Ms. Wade.
Thank you. Yes, we do, Your Worship.
Okay, we'll leave it to you then.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that the screen is sharing correctly and everyone can see it there.
Correct.
Thank you. So the first item that we have before council today is a development variance permit. We have an application that is looking to vary the maximum lot coverage requirement as well as the front yard setback requirement for a double wide mobile home out in Johnson Heights Mobile Home Park. So just a high level overview of the presentation, go through some backgrounds of the subject lands, go into the details of the proposal, look at the staff evaluation, as well as the staff recommendation to conclude. So looking at some background details on the property, it's located at 64 Johnson Way, Zone Mobile Home Residential District, being the R5A zoning. That does allow for stratified mobile home lots out in Johnson Heights. Property falls within the multifamily development permit area. It is serviced by municipal water and wastewater. And as you can see from the zoning map, it is surrounded by contiguous residential development. So as part of the development variance permit application, staff did send out landowner notification letters as prescribed for in the Local Government Act provisions. Was sent to 87 property owners within a 100 meter radius of the subject lands. Staff did receive one letter in opposition of the variance that should be included in the package for council. So going into some specifics of the development variance permit now, the lot does contain an existing double wide mobile home that was permitted through a 2020 building permit application. At the time of BP submission, the site plan did adhere to the requirements as prescribed for in the zoning bylaw with respect to site coverage and setback requirements. Upon receipt of a building location certificate, which was required prior to final occupancy, we got a very accurate plan that did identify some non-compliances. So this development variance permit is required to allow for final occupancy of that building permit. Specifically, we need to vary the maximum lot coverage from 35% to 40%, and we need to reduce the front yard setback from 6 meters to 4.1 meters. And I'll get into some more specifics of those now. So when we're looking at the siting details for the front yard setback requirement, you'll notice that the mobile home, the double wide mobile home, is actually 5.92 meters from the property line. It is that covered porch projection that is located 4.1 meters away. So again, staff have been in the practice of varying to the shortest component to ensure no ambiguity with the variance, and this plan would be attached to that development variance permit. So hence why you are seeing the requested variance go from 5.6 meters to 4.1 meters. When we're looking at the lot coverage requirement, so it is a maximum of 35% for any lot that is less than 425 square meters within the R5A zoning. If a lot is over 425 square meters, then the maximum lot coverage is 40%. The The subject lands are 416 square meters, and the site coverage, including that portion of the covered porch, is about 39.72%. So hence why in the council resolution and in the draft development variance permit, you are seeing it varied to 40% as a recommendation. So when we're getting into the evaluation from staff side, we are supportive of the variances for the following reasons. The front yard setback is relatively minor, and staff do not foresee any impacts on adjacent properties as a result. The zone does allow for double wide mobile homes on all lots. However, that 35% maximum lot coverage makes it challenging for lots that are less than 425 square meters. Staff do view the double wide mobile homes in this area as a more compatible and complementary development form to what is existing. The R5A zone does allow for single family and two family dwellings out there too. So double wide mobile home is most definitely more compatible, and that 35% lot coverage requirement does make it challenging to achieve that use. So staff do see that variance going up to 40%, allowing for a more contiguous compatible development form. And the proposal does comply with all other zoning bylaw requirements. Therefore, staff are in support of the variance, and I will conclude with the staff recommendation that is on the screen for council. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. So council, let's get this resolution on the table, and then we can ask any questions of Mr. Simon. Someone want to move this forward, please? Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, I can do that. The development variance permit DVP 2020-04 be approved at 64 Johnson Way, strata lot 64, section 25, township 23, range 2, west of the 6th Meridian Kootenai District strata plan. And 88, together with an interest in the common property in proportion to the unit entitlement of the strata lot as shown on Form V for the following variances to zoning bylaw number 1264. Section 7.6A.5 to reduce the minimum front yard setback requirement from 6 meters to 4.1 meters, and section 7.6A.4 to increase the maximum allowable lot coverage of 40%.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Rind. And now any questions of Mr. Simon? Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, thank you. Your worship, I'm wondering what are the parking requirements for that zone?
Mr. Simon.
Thank you, through your worship. Essentially, the zoning bylaw does not have a specific requirement for a mobile home, so staff have to apply in accordance with best practices what the most comparable use would be. And within section 12 of the zoning bylaw, that would be a single family dwelling, which would require a minimum of 2 parking stalls. That is evaluated as part of the building permit application for this, and it was found to be compliant.
Okay, so are those off-street parking spots somewhere?
Through your worship, yes, they are. It's common within this development for a portion of the off-street parking stalls to kind of kick out into the right-of-way a little bit. There are multiple mobile homes for this.
Okay, thank you.
Any further? Councillor Palmer. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you, your worship. Mr. Simon, a couple of questions. I'll be supportive of the variance, but I do have a few questions. So on the zoning for the lot coverage, it seems to me that that would have been caught on the original siting. Is that accurate?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, with the mobile home park building permit application submissions, because they are typically prefab, it is not uncommon for staff to receive site plans that are not as accurate as a building location certificate. The site plan that was received upon building permit receipt was very, very close to meeting this, or to being over on the setback requirements, and just barely met the building location or the maximum lot coverage requirements. And hence why staff required these items to be confirmed prior to occupancy as part of the building location certificate.
Go ahead, Councillor Palmer.
Your worship, I have a few questions. So, and then I'm just wondering, and it's just a comment I get at this point, rather than having on the lot coverage, rather than coming as a variance, if you're suggesting that larger coverage of 40% be permitted. And I'm just wondering if that's something to put in for a change to the zoning bylaw. And then also on the setbacks, it appears that this has happened in the past. And it would seem to me that there's a number of non-compliant that they're already non-conforming, probably legal non-conforming is a guess on my part. So I'm just wondering if that is something that needs to be addressed, because there seems to be this slippery slope. And when we start to be looking at tiny home developments, for example, what's that going to look like in the future when people start to find these dwellings are a bit too small and they start to encroach? And then finally, on I guess that has to do with the setbacks, but specifically on this one, so even though it's a very minor setback, the other units around that area are built in what would be allowed encroachments for the covered patio. And so I can almost envision that this particular unit will eventually enclose theirs. And so I'm just, I guess, wondering, because it's 2 meters, they won't be permitted under this to do another encroachment beyond that, correct?
Through your worship, to Councillor Palmer, just so I'm understanding, are you saying if they were to enclose the patio, therefore making it part of the unit, would they be able to project further into that setback requirement? Through your worship, staff would have to evaluate with the building permit application that would seek to enclose it, whether or not that would constitute still falling within that projection limit, or whether it would be encompassed in the full building envelope. So it would be something to evaluate at future application stage.
So, Your Worship, just to finalize then, so I think those are some things that need to be addressed, because I see some possible problematic things occurring within that development and getting the consistency. One last question was whether or not the strata had been specifically asked to provide feedback on that. And that concludes my questions.
Through your worship, Councillor Palmer, no, the strata is not specifically asked to provide feedback. There are members that live out there that are part of the strata that would have potentially received the notification, and it's also posted on our website as part of the public information package.
Great,
and just
thank you.
And just one note as well, staff are aware of some of the challenges with the language in the zoning bylaw right now, and as part of our zoning bylaw review, we are hoping to bring forth to committee of the whole at some point in the near future some of these items to help clarify where setbacks are measured from and how that relates to building permit applications, as well as maximum lot coverage requirement for this zone in particular, will be looked at as part of that zoning bylaw cleanup, and as well as the projections.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Palmer. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, so I will ask the question. All in favor? Thank you. That's passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We're going to go on to item number 6, announcements from the mayor. I just have one announcement. I just want to congratulate Councillor Palmer on winning the by-election on February 13th. This morning, Councillor Palmer was sworn in a ceremony in council chambers, and want to welcome him to council and a new face on our council table, and looking forward to working together, and good to see you here. And we're off to a flying start. Thanks for your questions, and we look forward to many councils together. Thank you. Council, yes, Mr. Palmer, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for the welcome, Your Worship, and I really look forward to working with you and the rest of council, and I'll try not to have too many questions in this first meeting.
No, we appreciate your questions. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 8A, recommendations from Committee of the Whole, short-term rentals. Ms. Wade, Mr. Simon, do we have a presentation on that, or do you want us to just dive into the resolution.
Your worship, there's no presentation on this.
Okay, so I'm going to ask if there's a councillor that would like to put this resolution on the table. Councillor Brookshill.
That staff proceed with option number 1, respecting the preferred public engagement approach for short-term rentals. No additional public engagement beyond the mandatory legislative requirements. Staff would create a project webpage that would refer to the amending bylaw along with the FAQ sheet attached to this report. Staff would bring forward the amending bylaw for council's consideration of first and second readings. Council would set a public hearing and staff would answer any inquiries that residents may have about the regulations in advance of the meeting through webpage updates, social media, press releases. The estimated cost of this option is $1,000 to $2,000 for communication support.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Elliott, Councillor Ryan, then Councillor Charlotte.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm just curious, the mandatory legislative requirements for public engagement, what could they be outlined?
Mr. Simon or Ms. Wade, would you like to weigh in on that, please?
The mandatory regulations for this is that we advertise for a public hearing and we set a date and we give the people the opportunity to comment on this. I would defer to corporate in regards to the process because we have to follow the COVID process, and I understand that corporate is working in resolving how we roll this out under the COVID electronic digital processes that we have to do. We would hold the public hearing, and then council would consider whether they wanted to do third reading that night, and if not, it could be deferred.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor Elliott?
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize that the public will get a chance to have their say and give their recommendations, and we will listen to them and make a decision from there.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Councillor Ryan, or Ms. Lowe, did you have something?
Your worship, Ms. Wade may want to weigh in a little more too. The short-term rental process has already gone through public input at one point, so this isn't the first time that the public has seen this. So it will be the regulatory process that will set the public hearing will be the second time that the public will see this process that council's led us down. I just wanted to make sure that councillors were aware of that. And we will be bringing forward a bylaw for first and second readings first before we set a public hearing.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, so I had a good chat with a friend of mine who spent a lot of time living in Tofino and who mentioned that some of the rules that are being proposed in this presentation are similar to the ones that were used in Tofino. And they've had a really tough time with people owning all of those homes that don't actually live in Tofino, which is of course going to be common in any kind of destination. But I hadn't really fully considered the implications of allowing a vacation rental in any residential location until he had spoken with me. And my question is about two things. Once we have the public hearing and we hear feedback from community members, will we be able to make adjustments without having to start the process all over again? That's the first question. And the second question is about what alternatives we have. For example, can we not allow it in duplexes and limit the number of places that we allow this in?
Okay, thank you for your question. I'm going to go to Development Services to answer those questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple of things. The proposed bylaws that we brought forward for Committee of the Whole were, yes, we considered Tofino, but we also look closely to our neighbors, Golden, in regards to how they've dealt with it, because they're a very similar community to us with similar conditions within their community. They have looked at it across residential. It's very hard to enforce when you come to being very specific. So a case in point is that the residential, when we go back to the original council resolutions, was to look at how we're dealing with single family homes and secondary suites. And in those zones, we also have duplexes, and Golden had the same situation. So we have compared ourselves to like and like so that we can roll this out to be fair to the residents in the community as how to be able to do a duplex and how you do a secondary suite in a single family home. Under the BC building code, people will be allowed, if they're a single real estate entity, to have a secondary suite in their unit should council move forward with that in the zoning bylaw amendments that will be coming forward to you. So you got two things with that. One, you got that it's allowed now in the BC building code, and two, our zoning has to permit it, which will be coming forward to you at a later date.
Right,
So
but if the zoning didn't permit it, then people would not be allowed to have vacation rentals in residential zones, right?
Yes, so we got a couple of things with that. We're recommending that in single family dwellings where there is a secondary suite, that they be permitted to have a short-term rental either in the main part of the dwelling or the lower part of the dwelling, which is consistent with best practices. And then they would have to be a permanent resident. They would have to license it accordingly to our business licensing. And right now we have zones that do permit it because we did spot zoning in regards to vacation rentals and the RVs, and we have 30 of those that are in residential zones. And the issue has been, how do we bring compliance into these residential zones so we have a way to enforce and regulate, and that would be by having it in the zoning.
Right. Yeah, I think it's great. Like, I think the proposal is really strong and the research is really good. And in terms of meeting in the middle, it seems like it's a pretty good compromise. It's just when I think about the implications of allowing basically any house to do this, it really scares me because, you know, you hear of other communities where that's happened, and then all of a sudden the home that used to have maybe 4 residents living in it or a family gets bought up by, you know, somebody from out of town. They put a basement suite in, they vacation rental 1 unit. Sure, they maybe house 1 or 2 locals, so how they meet that requirement, but you're losing 2 units to vacation rentals. And it would be really scary to see that happen everywhere, because all of a sudden then you've got all of these people that don't care as much about the community, perhaps. And maybe you'll have some local owners of these vacation rentals, but likely you'll have a lot of out of town owners of the property here that are not as invested in the community. And that's what I'm a little worried of.
So through your worship, if I could
Yes,
answer Councillor Lawrence's question. So first of all, the house would have to be set up that it has a secondary suite. Because what we're saying in the residential zones is you must be a permanent resident. So in the residential zones, you would have to be a permanent resident that is there 24/7, and you either live on the top or you live
but
in
not the
bottom.
owner of the home, the person living in it, right?
The owner of the home.
Interesting. Okay, so you can't, if there was somebody from out of town who owned a house and they wanted to have their daughter or whatever live in the home, they couldn't consider that to be a local person and then vacation rented?
Family member who's living in the house, right? They would be in there. The other way of doing it is you would have to have an agreement with the permanent owner that you're the caretaker and you would live in that unit as a permanent resident.
Okay, but that's the same point. I mean, having an agreement drawn up is not a super difficult thing. Maybe you get an extra $100 knocked off your rent for being this caretaker, but it doesn't really change that you're going to potentially lose a bunch of rental units to vacation rentals.
It in fact encourages that it's local and it is a local person that's in that unit and not somebody who's coming for the weekends.
but it's one person, right? Like if you're taking a house that has 5 bedrooms in it and then you're making one person be local, then you're taking 4 bedrooms away from the rental pool.
So to answer your question with that one, it would have to be, it might be a couple that is entered into the long-term lease agreement and agreed to property manage that unit, and they would be looking after the suite down below for the short-term rental. So they would have to have an agreement with the owner of that house, and it could be a couple that they are managing that property.
Yeah, I understand it. I think before I hadn't really fully appreciated the repercussions of having basically anybody be able to vacation rent their home if they want to make it a secondary suite in their home, which people with money are not going to bat an eyelash at that, right? It's like, oh, I have to spend $100,000 converting my basement so that I can make that return in a couple of years. That's no problem for them, But then what happens when every single basement suite, instead of being rented to people who work in businesses, is now rented vacation rental? And I know there's benefits on both sides, and this is just the compromise solution. And I'm not trying to say it's not a good one. I'm just like, I hadn't really fully appreciated that every single home in a residential neighborhood can now have this if they meet these requirements. And yeah, I think that could be a very scary picture.
So I guess a couple of things. To your worship, sorry. I think a couple of things is one, to broad brush it that every single home could do this would be it's a little overstated. And what we're saying is that if you have this condition where you have a suite in a house, you have the opportunity to do a short-term rental. But what we're trying to do is limit and control who comes into that residential neighborhood by saying that it's permanent. Somebody may have a house. It doesn't mean that they can meet all the building code requirements to actually put a suite in it and make that happen. I couldn't even assume that. What we need to concentrate on is that where the discussion came is to do with single family homes that had suites in them, and how are they going to be short-term rental, and how are we going to manage and enforce single family homes in a residential area to meet the requirements so we can enforce and manage short-term rentals in a residential neighborhood. And that's where these proposed bylaws are going for, is that we actually look at a way to manage the situation and prevent a whole house being rented out in a residential zone.
Yeah, I understand the intention. I just don't know that, in the long term, if it's going to play out the way that we hope it does. And I don't know if there's any, I know it's, unfortunately, I'm not coming with a solution. I'm just identifying that maybe we're being a little bit too lenient in allowing every location to allow for this in a residential zone.
We'll come up further with defining that as we move forward, will we not, Ms. Wade?
Through your worship, there will be discussion from the community that council can certainly listen to. I know that staff has spent the last year doing the research with best practices on this, having had experience in several resort communities. I believe what staff has come up with their best professional recommendation. Can we cover and catch all everything? Absolutely not. But have we done the best that we can do to manage this and address the community's concerns that were raised in 2016? Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ryan, Councillor Charlotte was next. Can I come back to you after I go to Councillor Charlotte?
Yeah, sure.
Councillor Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. First up, I just want to say thank you to the planning department for this. I know it's been a long time coming. This has been a lot of research trying to come up with the best solution we can in a difficult situation. I think the range of best practices out there goes to show how complicated this can be, and I appreciate the thought that's gone into making this work for Revelstoke. I would like to follow up a little bit on one thing that Councillor Ryan had mentioned, though, is I'm trying to remember the conversation around an idea on cap on business licenses.
Ms. Wade, any comment?
Yes. So originally in the 2016 resolution, Council had requested that staff look at a cap. They had proposed a cap of so many bed units and people outside of Mackenzie Village, the downtown area, and RMR. Maintaining a cap is a very difficult thing to do from a enforcement and capacity within staff. Best practices have shown that it's very, very hard to administer. So the best practices are to bring in the best enforcement that we can, which is bringing in the zoning regulations and the business licensing and the fees for business licensing, and working with enforcement on how to enforce on the short-term rentals.
Great. And if I could follow up on that, Your Worship.
Yes, go ahead.
Then would that number of business licenses, or monitoring or watching how many short-term rentals we have in the community, be part of an ongoing housing action plan?
Ms. Wade?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Schiller. So could you expand upon what you're sort of seeking for that as far as supply?
I'm just kind of curious because, I mean, normally in my own experience, I often look at dashboards that are just looking at rolling metrics. There are certain things that we're watching to see how we're doing in the various different departments or efforts, we'll say. Like, for example, I have retail, so we look at our average customer order. We look at how many people are ordering from various different types of products. And it's just something that you keep an eye on to watch for any issues. So if there were to be an issue over time where there are a lot of vacation rentals starting to be licensed in the community, where we would want to look at what's going on, is there something that'll catch that later on and come back to council or come back to senior management?
Through Your Worship, yes. So what we can do is track the business licenses. We can definitely look at the number of short-term rentals that are in secondary suites. And we can definitely track that as we look at our housing supply and demand and see what's happening with the supply side. Like, how are we actually producing more for housing supplies and the continuum of housing? So we could definitely incorporate that into the housing action plan as a measurement or a benchmark.
Yeah, that would be wonderful, if that's okay.
Yep. No, I hear where you're going. Yep.
Wonderful. And Your Worship, I just have one more question.
Go ahead, please.
I'm curious about the wording, just because I've been really sensitive to terminology lately, especially with it being Black History Month, where we use terms sometimes without understanding their implication to certain different groups and how they might hear them. I'm wondering if the term permanent resident has come up as a potential issue, because I know we're not using it in the context of a permanent resident with immigration, but rather a permanent resident living in that house. But I'm wondering if another definition or term had been entertained or if that had been considered.
Ms. Wade?
Your Worship, the definition being proposed for permanent resident is one that we base upon dealing with best practices, and we actually followed the Golden, what Golden has used for definition, and no, nothing had come up in that regard to us in our research.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Rand.
Yeah, so I had asked a question that I don't think I got an answer to, but that's because I kept talking. the tweak, if we were to tweak things at the public hearing or get feedback from the public and want to incorporate that, do we have to start the whole process over again, or can we make those adjustments and then pass that?
Ms. Wade?
Through Your Worship, so when it comes to making amendments after second reading, we would have to go to public hearing, we would have to go back to second reading with any substantial changes. If there isn't substantial changes to the intent, then we would be able to do slight modifications. And I will defer to our CAO if I misquoted anything.
Ms. Flo, any further comment? You're muted.
It's too many different kinds of mute buttons here. Yes, Ms. Wade is correct with that. So we
Okay.
you can make amendments.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr.
then-
Palmer.
Oh,
Councillor
okay.
Palmer, you had your hand up. Councillor Ryan, I'll come back to you. Councillor Palmer.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you to the planning staff for working on this. I note that it's going back from a long time, 2016, in a lot of dynamics and sort of difficulty sort of navigating complexity through that. So I appreciate that. I will be, unless my colleagues convince me otherwise, I'll be voting against the motion. I have a number of concerns, and maybe I'll just state them. Before I go, though, I have a couple of questions. One, so under this proposal, if somebody gets the permit, any residential area is entitled to have this use, if I'm understanding correct. And so long as they can meet all the code requirements, they could have potentially up to 8 people staying in a house in a residential area. Is that correct?
Ms. White.
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer. So in regards to people being in the house, it's by bedroom, and there's a upwards limit as we proposed, and that would be how the business licensing would go, because the business license would be charging by room.
In the maximum that's being proposed is 4 rooms, 4 beds, 8 people. Is that correct?
Four units, and that's because the existing vacation rental that was done in the spot zoning has that terminology in it. So we're just being consistent to align with what was historically done.
Right. I like the consistency. So my objections, one is first on the public consultation process, Your Worship, and I guess this is more for council, not questions for the planner directly. So it appears that through the committee of the whole, I think it was this option 1. I think this is going to be a very, very highly controversial issue within the city. It has been for some time. And I think meeting just the minimum requirements, which it seems to me is even more restricted in COVID days, that we aren't doing an adequate level of consultation with the community. Again, this was initiated in 2016. The world is very different today. Revelstoke is different today than it was in 2016. I think that if we were proceeding with this, it would need to have the full open house, and so saving a few dollars for something that may have unintended consequences. And I think we saw that with the spot zoning as well. So we see in the agenda that there's some concern with the accommodation business with competing with these smaller units. Mostly they're addressing illegal suites. And again, I applaud looking for solutions to deal with the illegal suites. However, again, with the pressure on the hotels and the viability of the larger established businesses, I think there needs to be more dialogue on that. The third point that is on the neighborhoods. So I am not convinced that vacation rentals should be permittable in all residential zones. Already with either those that are either legal or those that are non-conforming, there's conflicts that are happening in pretty much every residential street. And I just see this exasperating the problem. I think there maybe needs to be some further consideration as to whether or not some residential areas should not have vacation rentals. And there is certainly communities, resort communities that have followed that in certain areas. The other is if council is going to proceed with this, something to consider is just having instructions to staff to go to first reading. It's slowing it down a little bit, but to get that feedback from the community. Again, I think there's going to be a fairly strong backlash. I might be wrong, but those are the kind of the reasons that I'll be opposed to this motion as it stands. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Charlotte, you had your hand up, and Councillor Rind.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just to Councillor Palmer's comment with the level of consultation that's already happened in the community, just to clarify, this is not started from the 2016 process. The department took the information from the 2016 process, modified and updated, and did a ton of research. There was quite a bit of community consultation on some of the ideas for wording. However, I'm not opposed to the idea of slowing this down a little bit. I think this is important to get it right. If we have a little bit more opportunity to get a little bit of feedback, I would be open to that. I'm pretty comfortable with it going forward and us just moving along, because I do feel confident in the amount of community consultation. But like I said, I'm also open to slowing it down, depending on the rest of council's feelings.
Okay. Councillor Rand?
Yeah, so my first question is about duplexes. Is there any way, I think Ms. Wade, you had made mention of it, but I don't think I understood the answer. Is there a way to make it so that we allow it in residential homes, but not in duplexes, or is there some reason those are tied?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Rind, the reason why that we are addressing the duplexes and the single family is the residential zones allow for single family in some zones and single family and two family in other zones. And because those zones are throughout the city, the easiest way to address it is to actually address the unit with duplex, just like Golden did as well. And so that we have a regulation in our zoning bylaw so we can regulate anybody who would like to rent out the other side of their duplex, because we have a lot of those, what they would call it, they're not a single real estate entity, but somebody will own that duplex and they can rent out the other side. So that allows us to control that and retain the housing for our community. But that person has to be a permanent resident. And I can't stress that enough, that it is a permanent resident who must be operating and maintaining that single family home or duplex within those residential zones.
But yeah, but the other people that are full-time residences are the people who are living there right now. So it doesn't really make a difference. If anything, it's removing people from their home now.
So Ms. Wade, if I can just ask for some clarification on duplex. So if one person owns one half a duplex and another family owns the other half a duplex, they're essentially two separate land titles, two separate entities. Am I correct on that?
Through Your Worship, yes, as long as there's a party wall subdivision, which there should be in place in that situation. And then that becomes a single real estate entity.
Okay, so that if somebody, okay, thank you. And so if someone owns one half a duplex and has decided that they want to make either their upstairs or their downstairs into a short-term rental, that's kind of, is that what, and I'll go, Councillor Ryan, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about.
Okay. And so I guess clarification on that, so that so there's going to be, I guess, instead of just one family and potential noise issues or parking issues, I guess that's kind of a concern that I have. But are those sorts of things are built into the short-term rental policy or bylaw that we're going to build? Is that correct?
Through Your Worship, that is correct, because right now there could be illegal short-term rentals in those very units, and we want to bring those into compliance. And so the only way we can do that is by regulating it and making it very clear in our zoning bylaw what you can and cannot do, which is what this is proposing to do.
Okay. So then I want to go back to a comment that Councillor Palmer has brought up about slowing the process down to first reading only. And so when we get to first reading only, then basically there is a chance to amend things that we're hearing in the community. Is that correct process?
Through Your Worship, and I see Ms. Lowe might want to chime in as well. So in regards to doing first reading, yes, it's similar to what we did with Hay Road. That you could come forward with first reading. You can consider what we're hearing in the community, and then we can bring it back for second reading, and those bylaws could then move forward to public hearing.
Your worship.
Yes, Ms. Lowe.
So what council needs to consider is this is a regulatory process as well. So if you do first reading, we don't collect public input until the public hearing. So we don't have any policies that outline that differently. We've always collected the public input during the public hearing, so council could consider everything at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So first, the thing that I like the best about the proposal is dealing with the plethora of illegal units out there and how to bring them in conformity. I think that's very, very good. I applaud that. Just on the first reading, it's kind of tied to the motion as well, because what I'm suggesting is that we need a more robust public input. And there's other ways of doing that, either through an open house. And I understand that that's not maybe the way we've been doing things. I just see that this being as a fairly widespread, and there would need to be some more possibly better direction. If we just go to first reading, are we doing an open house, or how do we provide some more input? And I do recognize that there's been lots of work, including the survey. I haven't seen the results of the survey, and I guess there's some questions that I have as far as what was actually the meat inside that survey. I think might be important for us to see. So those are just a couple of the components. And I do recognize that if we go to just a first reading, the budget is probably nowhere near adequate to address all the extra public processes. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Charlotte, then Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm wondering if we could, what about option 2 that was brought to committee of the whole? That would involve a informational video, just more information for residents and more time for residents to provide comments before the first and second reading. The budget for that one was estimated at $2,000 to $3,000.
Okay, this definitely, because the recommendation on the motion here is just a recommendation from committee of the whole. So if you want to change to option 2, that may be something, but I'm going to ask Ms. Lowe just for clarification on that sort of thing, just before I put my foot in my mouth here.
So, Your Worship, we do have a resolution on the table.
Okay.
That has come from committee of the whole that council debated and voted in favor of bringing forward to council. So there is a resolution on the table that council should make a vote on.
Okay, so we'll have to vote on this resolution, and then if it were to be, I'm going to ask the question, Ms. Lowe, if it were to be defeated, and then we could bring back option 2, or are we back to the square one?
No, you could definitely bring forward a resolution to look at option number 2.
Okay. Councillor Ryan, then Councillor Palmer.
Sorry to go back to duplexes, but I just need some clarification. So if there's 2 owners, one owner owns one side and another owner owns the second side, and these separate owners wanted to vacation rent the whole side of their duplex, are they allowed to do that?
This way.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Ryan. So in this scenario you described, that is a duplex that has one owner on one side and one owner on the other side. They cannot do vacation rental because they own those duplexes. If the owner, and it was I'm trying to, how to say this simply, is that there's situations in this city where there's duplexes that exist that have not been subdivided, and an owner owns the whole building. They own, and they may live in one unit or they may rent out both units. So those could be somebody could be renting those out at nightly rental, and we want to manage that situation. So what we're saying is that if an owner has that scenario, you must have a permanent resident residing in one half so that we can retain that rental or permanent housing option by a permanent resident in town. The other side could be rented out for short-term rental, but the other side has to manage and take care of it.
Okay.
And
And there's, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And there's no way to remove certain types of houses because you said in certain areas the zoning has single family and duplexes allowed. Is that right?
Correct. And it's scattered throughout the city. So being able to try to do it by areas and neighbors and zones would be so complicated. We're trying to get to the first step in how we manage and regulate the situation we have. We know we have illegal rentals out there. We're trying to manage it. And the only way we can do it is by bringing in the regulatory process, which is why we went out to the community over this last year and did surveys, focus groups, met with all the various committees, and have consulted for the last year on this and have been supported with what we brought forward to council.
Yeah, no, I hate to be the person to ask these questions so late in the game because I was so supportive the whole way through. So I apologize for that. I think it just hasn't sunk in until I'd spoken to somebody who's lived in a place that implemented a solution similar to this one and has seen some of the realities of what it allows. And now that I kind of think about what that looks like in Revelstoke, it makes me a little gun shy to kind of like keep going full steam ahead with this. But at the same time, I don't know what the solutions are. So I just have a couple other questions about the requirement for a permanent resident on site. What if that person was like had to be the owner? Because the person that we don't want, or I guess like the entire goal of this proposal was to allow for, you know, the instance where there's a family that needs to vacation rent their basement suite because, you know, that's how they can afford to live in their home, for example, and that's how they need to supplement their income or whatever. And in those cases, we want to encourage it. And they're permanent residents, but they're also the owner of the house. So what if instead of having there be like an agreement that you're the caretaker, that you actually have to also be the property owner?
That's what.
So the idea is that you're to be a permanent resident, and the permanent resident is to be, ideally, the situation is that it would be the owner of the house residing in either the upper or the lower section. That is the goal.
But then if that's the goal, why don't we make that the requirement?
We tried to define permanent resident to best meet that, to make sure, because it's very hard in the legislative world to define that user. It's without actually going back to Councillor Sherlette's comment about permanent residents, and I'm trying to couch my words very carefully here. So the idea is that the permanent resident is the permanent resident who is defined as permanent resident, which is, you know, lives in the city of Revelstoke. So that is exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, but I guess the only difference there, which is a big difference, is that little nuance of it being the caretaker versus it being the owner of the home is pretty substantial, because the person who owns that home also gets to vote in these elections and to elect, you know, where the tax dollars get spent, right? So if we're giving that vote to somebody who doesn't live in town, as well as whoever lives in the home, then we're basically diluting the number of people that are voting about local issues. And I guess my concern is that when you open this pool up and it's just so simple as creating a caretaker agreement and finding, you know, the son of your daughter's friend to be the caretaker, then in those instances, you have a bunch of people out of town that might not be as vested in the community as a family who's doing vacation rental to make ends meet. So I think it's a pretty important detail.
If I could just respond, Your Worship.
I'd like you to respond, but Mr. Simon would like to respond as well. I see his hand was up as well. So are you both okay, or just get one of you, or what's going to be the best for the two of you?
I'll let
Miss.
Okay, Mr. Simon wants to go ahead, and then I'll follow up on the voting piece.
All right,
about
thank you.
permanent residents.
Mr. Simon.
Your Worship, I was going to let Ms. Wade go first, but just one point when Ms. Wade is referencing caretaker, the operator of the short-term rental needs to be a permanent resident. I think she was going to mention that, but it would not be an out-of-town person. So if you are a permanent resident who is currently renting a secondary suite within a single-family dwelling, and the owner of that house wants to rent out the top portion, that permanent resident or residents who are living in the suite would therefore be the operator for the short-term rental. So whoever the operator of the short-term rental is needs to be a permanent resident within the city of Revelstoke for all the residential areas. That keeps 50% at least of all these units in our rental pool, and anything beyond two-family dwelling, all the multi-family dwellings cannot be used for vacation rental, so that again, those stay within our rental pool.
But just to clarify, my point was that, like, you know, I appreciate that they're a permanent resident, but should the operator not also be the owner?
Through your worship, and Ms. Wade may have some more to add on to this, from a zoning bylaw perspective, you're getting into using the zoning bylaw to regulate the user rather than the use, which is something that a zoning bylaw does not do. And from our side, when we're looking at permanent residents throughout the city, it wouldn't really make a difference if they're a renter and they're a member of the community, or if they're the owner of the property and a member of the community. As long as whoever is operating that short-term rental is a permanent resident, then they have a vested interest to make sure that the tenants of that short-term rental are good neighbors. And that was the whole goal of the regulations.
But I think the goal of the regulations was also to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the community. And I think when we think about, you know, the businesses that are having a hard time finding staff for their, accommodation for their staff, you know, how many of those existing units are going to be turned into vacation rentals? Again, I'm not against vacation rentals. I'm just saying the likelihood that somebody from out of town is going to put the money into purchasing a home and then changing that basement unit to make it a vacation rental is much higher than somebody who lives and works here and makes a wage here. And so if we just make that tiny little difference, you're reducing the number of people who are going to do that. And that's the goal, is it not?
Ms. Wade, anything further? Then I'm going to go to Councillor Palmer and Councillor Schiller.
Just to echo what Mr. Simon is saying, and what I'm trying to say is that it has to be a permanent resident in the community, and that's all we're trying to do. And we cannot regulate for the type of person in a house. So we need to come up with a definition of permanent resident and what that means, and that and then it would help us to regulate and maintain housing for our community by 50%, which is what we're trying to do. So we can eliminate any illegal and have the right regulatory tools. Those permanent residents do vote. They're allowed to vote after a period of time being here. They're very much a contributor. Whether you're an owner or a renter, you are still a voter if you meet your permanent
Absolutely. But so is the owner of that house, who in larger and larger amounts is no longer going to be living in Revelstoke. So when it comes to replacing our, roof, and anytime we have to issue a large amount of debt and we have to go poll all voters, who's not going to care about that stuff? People who don't live here.
Okay. I get it, Councillor Rind. I know that permanent residents, any resident needs somewhere to rent. So if a permanent resident is operating the short-term rental, whether that's on behalf, they've got an agreement with someone else, or they're able to, make sure that they can do that under their rental agreement, or whatever the case may be, they've got skin in the game as far as keeping noise and things down.
Yeah, I I think we're just having different conversations. Like, I don't know how to, or like, I just totally don't get it. I just, the point I'm trying to make is like,
Short-term rentals need to be owned by the people who own the property should be the only ones running a short-term rental. Is that the point you're trying to make?
kind of like, so to maybe go back and just, and this is just my take on it, is like, I think about the vacation rental world and the use of a vacation rental, and I go, yeah, that's a cool type of accommodation. You know, of course, we want to be able to offer that. People are going to come here and they're not going to want to stay in a hotel for whatever reason. So we need to be able to offer these types of accommodation. Is it true that they have, you know, some benefit over the hotels in terms of taxes? Sure. And we're not necessarily collecting as many taxes as we would like to from these vacation rentals. So if we're going to make a rule that is structured around who does and doesn't get to have a vacation rental and operate it, and again, I guess I'm hearing Mr. Simon's voice in my head that we can't regulate the user, just the use. But when you think about in our capacity as counselors, you know, what type of person do we want to be operating these vacation rentals? Personally, my stance is that, you know, it's that old couple who maybe they're now empty nesters and they'd like to transform their basement so that they can have a rental property. Or it's that family who purchased a house with a basement suite for that exact purpose because they said, you know, this is going to be a stretch for us, but maybe if we have this basement suite, we can make it work. And so those are all owners that also live in the building, owners that will also operate the vacation rental. And I feel like it's a very small detail, but a really important one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer, then Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. So Councillor Ryan, I think that it encompasses one of many possible unintended consequences with this. And again, I do applaud the whole idea of addressing vacation rentals. One of the problems with this is we're doing that in isolation of some of the other things. Are we taking away from long-term accommodation? Should we be looking at vacation rentals that is even more flexible, that's closer to the resort? Those kind of questions, which isn't on the table right now. Just on the motion again, as it stands right now, I'll be voting against it. There was some dialogue earlier on a couple other potentials, ways of doing that. So whether we do this and if it collapses and we start all over again, the other is to do an amendment. If there was an amendment to just be going to first reading, and ideally I prefer the option 3, even though it's much more expensive. But if there is those two amendments to this motion, I'm not going to be putting the amendment motion on there, but that's another possibility. If that's where council is wanting to go, then I might be willing to support that. Again, I'll applaud the work that planning and staff have been doing in this. It's very, very complex. I again think there's going to be significant dialogue in the community and possibly some likely unintended consequences. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to put forward another scenario here of what that permanent resident could look like. I know Councillor Ryan was talking to staff and how staff need homes. Myself being one of them with my husband and my housemate, where we are lucky in our rental that we have now. It is very much more expensive than it was just a few years ago, but it is actually below what I'm seeing places go for now with rent. So as a service employee, to afford a decent place to rent in this community is getting harder and harder. To me, I see, like myself and Glenn would be possibly interested in being a caretaker to be able to rent a nice suite that would normally be going for about $2,000 a month, which we could not afford, but to be able to work towards that. Because a caretaker of a vacation rental, in my mind, is a part-time role. It's not a full-time role, which complements well with a lot of our service employees that don't work full-time. We all joke that we go more than full-time during the peak seasons, and then in the shoulder seasons, we do less. So as another scenario of what that permanent resident could look like. I'm curious to hear from our councillors that haven't been too vocal yet tonight to see how they feel on this.
Great. I was going to ask the same question, but Councillor Rind has her hand up. So I'm going to go to Councillor Rind, then Councillor Brooks Hill, and then I'll go to Councillor Elliott.
I like the idea of what you're saying, Councillor Schiller. I think it's missing the point that even if there are 100 opportunities for caretaker positions, that means there's now 300 units fewer places because those homes have been converted from whatever they're doing now, families, long-term rentals, whatever, to now being purposefully half and half. So it's like great for 100 people, and yet 300 people are now not having a place to be.
Okay. Councillor Brooks Hill.
I've been appreciating this discussion, and it's touching on quite a few issues that I've thought about. I will support the motion that's on the table right now. But to address some of the other concerns, I think it's interesting, this idea, that some out-of-town person is going to buy a house and then, say, for instance, put in a basement suite if there isn't one, and then rent it to someone and say, okay, you're going to be my person who's going to be my caretaker for a vacation rental. Well, the unintended consequence there with BC's rental laws is that person now has the owner of that house over a barrel. Because come winter season, they can say, well, I don't feel like paying rent. I'm not going to pay you a cent. And if you can't kick me out, but if you want me to keep saying I'm the caretaker, well, I'm not going to pay you any rent. So I think a lot of people will be very hesitant to have this if they're not living in the house, to rent it to someone, and you're giving them an enormous power in that sense. And I think another unintended consequence that hasn't been brought up is the number of illegal secondary suites that exist in Revelstoke right now. And I think we'll have one consequence of this is we'll have a lot of people coming forwards and trying to legalize their secondary suites, which would then lead to increased tax revenue for the city, as well as bringing a lot of places into compliance with fire and health and safety codes as well, which I think it would be a huge positive for the town. So I'm happy to move forwards to this with this, and I'm looking forward to a public hearing and hearing what the community thinks, because personally I think that this has reached a good balance on, and the truth be told, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I think we have to do something, and I think this achieves a good balance. My one issue is I think the business license should be more expensive, but that's a minor thing that's actually very easy to tweak at a later date, or could be addressed as we're going through this process.
Great. Councillor Elliott, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, Gary. Your Worship, just a bit of background. I think the short-term, we've been seeking a short-term housing resolution here for quite a while, but it was sought out to counter the loss of the long-term long-term housing needs of our community. We were sacrificing those long-term items for these short-term gains that we could get from a vacation rental. I think that the new regulations addresses that. It formalizes the regulations pertaining to short-term rentals, and it gives us some certainty that the house will have a long-term rental in it. So that's a big win on what we've got in place currently. We've got all these illegal issues going on, and this is an attempt to address that. It's not a solution to all of our housing problems. We need a lot more dialogue on that and a lot more things to come forward, and to spend a lot of time addressing short-term rentals as our solution is wrong, because we've got some bigger issues to address yet. But Michael, you touched on licensing. That's a big one right now. We're not, any short-term rental facility is not contributing adequately to the infrastructure and and we're not capitalizing on the value of that home. If you can rent out your home with a short-term rental space in it, that home is significantly more valuable, and it has more of and it should be taxed accordingly. My take, if we can't do it through tax, it's got to be a license fee, and I think that's a way. What if we get that license fee, we put it back into infrastructure? So that we're having half the discussion. We haven't figured out to connect the law, the bylaw, to how we're going to collect on fees. I mean, we're going in half blind on this one.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Ms. Wade, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to chat briefly about Councillor Elliott's comments and Council Brooks Hill's. In the report we're preparing, we listened to the discussion at Committee of the Whole, and we are moving forward with some discussion about the business licensing and the utilities, which will be outlined in the report. We're very aware of those situations, and we understand what needs to happen with that, and it will be in the report coming forward to Council should we move forward with first and second reading.
Ms. Wade. All right. The motion that's on the table, I'm supportive of. We had talked about this in Committee of the Whole, and we've been wanting this to come forward for some time. So I think it's addressed as many issues as we can for the time being. So definitely I'm supportive of it. I'm going to ask Councillor Ryan, do you still have your hand up? Do you have another question before I ask the question?
Yeah, I have another question. Is a lease agreement a requirement to all the caretakers?
Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon, any comment on that?
So the caretakers will have to enter into a lease agreement. That is the option of the owner. Can we regulate that? That's crossing over the BC Rental Tenancy Act, but we would require that they be a permanent resident within the business licensing that we would look at.
Because I was really interested, like I thought it was a great point that Councillor Brooks Hill brought up, because it does give the caretaker a ton of power, but only if they have a lease agreement in place, right? Like if they don't have a lease agreement, there's nothing preventing that owner saying, oh, you don't want to do it? Well, you don't want to pay your rent. We're just going to kick you out of here and get somebody else on this long list of people that love to live here to do it for us. So it would be interesting if we put like a lease, even if it's just a requirement to see the lease agreement. Could we not make that a requirement of the application?
I can explore I can explore that and see what our legal abilities are to do that.
Because it would be awful to put to not at least just confirm that caretaker has a lease agreement, because then it would put the owner in even more of a powerful position. So that would be my suggestion. I'm interested in seeing this go forward to public hearing, sort of. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Your Worship?
Yes, Ms. Lowe.
What about if staff reported back to Council on at first reading as to the number of existing suites right now and duplexes that are currently within the community, so that they could understand the impact, so the community and Council could understand the impact?
I don't understand that.
It just gives a little more information as to how many units that we actually do have.
Like how many homes in the community exist?
The vacation rental would, what the vacation rental would do to the impact of the rentals right now. Could we do that, Marianne? Is that possible? Or just to give Council a sense of what's it going to change?
We can certainly look at what's in our business licensing database. I wouldn't say how accurate it is, but
right.
For those that are licensed, we could certainly have an idea, and we certainly can have an idea of what our current vacation rentals are that are licensed. So that we can pull up easily. It doesn't allow us to understand the illegal suites that are out
Correct.
there.
Yeah.
It also doesn't reflect what these changes that we might make, how that will impact people's purchasing decisions on homes. So I don't know that it's
true.
super valuable.
Yeah, that's
personally.
True. Yeah.
But.
Okay.
All right. Councillor Palmer, you have one last comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just based on that last bit of information, I'm going to propose an amendment. I said I wouldn't, but based on that information, and that we go to first, amend it to just to first reading, and that council brings that information in time for that first reading. So it's slowing it down just a little bit, but not significantly changing.
You're asking for doing a first amendment or doing an amendment to bring to first reading, and you're asking staff, you'd mentioned the word council, you're asking staff to bring forward information regarding that?
Yes. Yeah. So it basically, I'm putting an amendment resolution to change it to first reading. It would need a second, I guess, for that.
Okay. Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm not gonna second it.
Okay.
Only because I think that even if we slow this down, I have a feeling the people that we're gonna get feedback from are gonna be the same groups of people that we've already been engaging with and that we already know how they feel about these things. That's why I won't be.
So there's been a proposal for an amendment. Is there any of you that would like to second this this amendment? Councillor Brooks Hill, you have your hand up. Are you seconding this amendment, or do you have a question?
I'll second the amendment and maybe comment on it as well.
Okay, so Councillor Brooks Hill is going to second the amendment, and the amendment means we're just going to slow this process down to first reading. Everything else that is in the first resolution stands. So comment, Councillor Brooks Hill.
Yeah, I think this is a fair enough way to slow it down. It's only going to likely slow it down by 2 weeks, and it's not going to cost any more, and we'll just bring a bit more information. But I think, as has been pointed out, this is likely to be contentious, or it's certainly an important issue for the town. And just having that much more time for, you know, the media to pick up on this, for people to become aware, I think will be a positive.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Any further comments on the amendment going just to first reading? Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, just maybe for clarity for me, what's the purpose of getting this done urgently?
Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon, you care to weigh in? I'm not sure if it's urgently. It's been something that's been vetted through committee of the whole, trying to bring a process as we move forward. That's it, but I'll ask for any comments from Development Services, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Rund.
Yes, so Your Worship, it is one of the council priorities that has been listed in our work plan, and that is why it is before you. And we've consulted with the community who has been eager to get these regulations before council for consideration.
Great, thank you. Councillor Ryan, do you have a question or statement?
Yeah, I would support this amended motion, but I would be interested in having the time between here and the next reading to be used to get a bit more information about two things in particular, if other councillors agree. The first being that tying that requirement for the operator to also be the owner. I'm interested in seeing if there's other communities that have done that and if that's possible and if we have the ability to do that. And then the second would be requiring that a lease agreement be part of that caretaker, or the proof of the caretaker also shows proof of a lease agreement. And I'd be interested in hearing what staff has to say about that.
Okay, I think that's something that staff can definitely look at. However, when you're talking about agreements between tenant and owner, that's up to those two to define what they feel is fine. I know that I have commercial building, and I wouldn't enter into anything without a lease agreement, whether that be residential or not. But that's something that has to be defined between the two. And I don't think that the province has a legal ability to step in and say what you can and cannot do, let alone the municipality. However, I will leave that to the staff to look into.
But also, but to be fair, we also don't have to grant people these licenses to operate vacation rentals. So if it's just a requirement of our process, and it's not saying that you do or don't have to, we don't care about the terms of the lease agreement. You just have to show that there is one, so that if anything were to happen, that permanent resident is, somewhat protected, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. All right,
Yeah.
so I'll leave that with the staff. Councillor Charlotte, you had a comment? Is this something to do with the amendment?
Yes, it is. It does. And this is regarding the idea of slowing this process down. I'm hearing what Ms. Wade is saying, because this was one of our priorities. And hey,
it smelled like I was allergic to it.
Hold on, sorry. Yelling. Sorry, housemates. Anyway, so I appreciate the fact that this has been one of our priorities. We have been pushing to get this going. We've done a lot of consultation, and to slow it down without good value for that, a return on that slowdown, I don't think would be prudent. I'm wondering, my understanding of first, second, third reading, after the first reading has been heard, no more public comments can be accepted until the public comment or the public hearing process. Is that correct?
Ms. Wade or Ms. Lowe?
Public comments are accepted during a specific time for the public hearing. Yes.
Right. So once we have that first reading, whether we have first and second reading or just first reading, then second reading, the public consultation process will be the same window. This would just allow for more time, perhaps, for education of the public, so that when they do comment, they're able to comment better. I'm just wondering if my fellow councillors think that added educational time would be worth it, or if I'm barking up the wrong tree.
Thank you for that, Councillor Charlotte. When we did this in committee of the whole, I was supportive of the resolution that's on the table, and I still stand by that. That was brought forward by one or two councillors to bring to do the least amount of engagement, because lots of engagement had already been done. And so seeing the slowing down of this, I'm wondering, is that of new information that's come to you and you feel that's a prudent thing, or are you supportive of the original motion? So any further comments on the amendment where we just go to first reading? Councillor Brooks Hill, were you going to say something? You're moving closer to the computer. Nope. Okay, so I will ask the question then on the amendment, which basically just brings it to the first reading. So all in favor of the amendment? Okay, opposed to the amendment. So you note that Councillor Charlotte and Mayor Sulz are opposed. Councillor Palmer, Rind, Elliott, and Brooks Hill are in favor of the amendment. Now, do we need to vote any further on this to bring it forward, Ms. Lowe?
Yes, you have to call the question on the amendment or the resolution as amended.
Okay, so councillors, I'm going to call the question on the resolution as amended, which is bringing it forward to first reading. All those in favor? Okay, so note that all councillors are in favor. Mayor Sulz is opposed. Thank you. That has been passed as amended. Thank you, councillors. We're going to go on to staff reports. I just want to take a 2-minute washroom break before we carry on. Thank you. Okay, who's vacuuming? Just wait a moment, Councillor Schiller to come back into frame, and then we will start. Thank you. All right, we have all councillors back at the table. I'd like to carry on with staff reports 11A, development services, FCM efficiency financing. Mr. Simon, do you want to say anything before we put the motion on the table?
Your Worship, I can speak a couple quickly to this. This grant has been a work in progress. It is in regards to dealing with the green fund that the FCM has. It's going to help us with doing retrofits for single-family homes and residential units throughout the city. They'll allow us to do a feasibility study that will actually, for us to understand what our housing stock is that needs to be retrofitted, costs associated, and financial plans. This fits in with our SEEP and climate action plan, and we had to be vetted first in order to go through the application. When we went through the application, we have now made it to the peer review, and we are on our way to being considered for the grant, and we're seeking support from council to continue with this process.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Wade. Much appreciated. So, councillors, is there one of you that would like to put this resolution on the table, please? Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, I can do that. That the application for funding to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM Community Efficiency Financing Program, intended to support a feasibility study to establish a funding program to improve the energy efficiency of residential buildings be supported.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Palmer. Any further discussion on the motion? I think if there's some, Councillor Elliott, you have a question.
So we're, sorry, Your Worship, so we're looking for funding to do a study about efficiency. Is that what we're seeking right now?
Ms. Wade, do you want to weigh in, please?
Yeah, through Your Worship, this is funding to do a feasibility study so that we can figure out how to make our existing housing stock meet performance criteria so we can meet climate action. In order for people to be able to do that, we're looking at how we can bring financial tools and incentives forward, which is what this fund has been created from FCM, and that is why we're applying for the funding, so that we can help people move forward with retrofitting their buildings to meet climate action goals.
Does that make sense to you now, Councillor Elliott? You understand what the program is?
Well, does it make sense to you? Good question.
Absolutely. So when I look at that and hear what I'm saying is that we're looking for some funding for FCM to help us do a feasibility study that will actually establish a funding program for residents in the community to bring their homes up to energy efficiency, and then be able to help them find a way to finance that in the long term. I think that's basically what we're trying to get to. Is that not correct, Ms. Wade?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. So for me, I think it's a great opportunity if FCM's willing to give some funds. Definitely there's some vetting process to get this into our community. And we've got from stage 0 to stage 1 or 2 and a way to move forward. And so what they're asking for is council supportive of this so that our staff can go forward and go to FCM and say, hey, council's on board with us trying to get our community more energy efficient. Councillor Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just to clarify, reading through the report, it looks like the funding for this program is coming from FCM. for the CEF, or community energy.
Efficiency financing.
Yes, community efficiency financing. So this is the first step to looking at how would that be offered in Revelstoke to help upgrade homes to be more energy efficient.
Correct.
This sounds absolutely fantastic. It's exactly, like, I'm fully in support of this. One of the big challenges is how do you incentivize upgrading the older homes in our communities, especially when they're rentals. The cost and that barrier is just so high. And it's easier to just keep the rental running as cheap as possible. We end up paying outrageous amounts for heat. So I'm really happy to see this come forward in a way that the funding is coming from elsewhere in partnership with that local taste. So this is going to be set up for Revelstoke, not a cookie cutter thing that would not really apply to the local needs.
Great. Appreciate that comment. Any further comment, Councillor Elliott? You had another question or comment?
Yeah, I'm just curious, who would do the work?
Ms. Wood?
The money is to hire a consultant to do the work for us.
I mean, I know just generally that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that a lot of the houses in the older homes in our community are not efficient. So, and the newer ones are going to be up to our step code in the next year or so. So I'm just kind of trying to determine the need and the benefit, because it, you know, generally it's common sense. What if they're not living up to, the windows are not right, or the insulation's not, you know, up to R20, or so it doesn't take. Anyway, I'm just curious what we're seeking and what we're going to use the money for.
Okay, so I think just because you know that your windows aren't working, there are ways of looking at the entire house to see what's going to be the best suited. What do they do next? What's going to move forward to make things more energy efficient? Is it changing heating systems? Is it making sure that the leaks and the insulation and whatnot are done? What's the process and whatnot? And it gives people some guidance rather than just flying at it, going, well, if I replace this, this is going to help. And I've seen that happen in houses where windows have been replaced, but the insulation has been sawdust, so it really didn't matter. So you look at that, and I think this is kind of the ways of finding the efficiencies for people. Councillor Palmer, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Your Worship. Agree with Councillor Schiller that it's, you know, it sounds exciting and all the sort of green stuff. I also share Councillor Elliott's skepticism. These programs have been, and there's even current ones now with BC Hydro. So is this a redundancy on bureaucracy? At the end of the day, I'm going to be supporting the motion. It seemed that the staff think this is a prudent thing to do, and we have a lot of other things to get on with the agenda. So I will support, but I also appreciate Councillor Elliott's sort of skepticism.
Thank you for your comments. Any other councillors want to weigh in? Any comments? Seeing none, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, Council. Moving on to item 11B, we have a presentation, zoning amendment, bylaw 2285, comprehensive development zone 13, 307 Downie Street. So we have a presentation. Go forward, Mr. Simon. Are you doing the presentation?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Your Worship. Again, just want to make sure everyone can see the presentation on the screen here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So what we have before Council today is a zoning bylaw amendment application. The applicant is looking at amending Comprehensive Development Zone 13 to facilitate the development of a 4-unit multifamily residential building. So again, just giving Council a brief overview of how the presentation will run. We're going to start off with some background on the subject lands, get into the details of the proposal, which will be the development itself and the corresponding CD zone amendments. We're going to move into the staff evaluation and finally conclude with the staff recommendation. So the subject property is located at 307 Downie Street. It is currently zoned Comprehensive Development Zone 13. You can see immediately adjacent to the property on the opposite side of Downie, they're all zoned R2A district, and then on the opposite side of the laneway, they are higher density zonings for R4 CD11 that currently permits townhouse development. Property does hold the T4 walk-up residential land use designation, which does set the stage for kind of medium density development on the subject lands. Subject lands are fully serviced with municipal water, sanitary, and storm services. And at future building permit stage, the applicant would be required to do complete drawings for the civil services. So looking at some background on the CD13 zone and why we ultimately have amendments here to council today. CD13 was originally established in 2009. It was established to enable the development of a 4-unit apartment style building. When the CD Zone 13 was adopted, appended to it was a schedule that included very specific plans that outlined the design, form, and character of the building. Since the original adoption of Comprehensive Development Zone 13, the design of the building has changed to better suit the irregular site shape, and this has generated the need for text amendments to the CD13 zone, which we will go in more details on. So when we look at what proposal we have before council, the revised concept still maintains the original 4-unit density. It equates to approximately 40 units per hectare, or about 16.5 units per acre, which is pretty comparable for what you're going to see for row home or multifamily development. The specific design parameters, including building materials, will be addressed with a subsequent development permit that would also be required to come to council, should council be in support of the CD zone bylaw amendments. So getting into the CD zone amendments themselves, the first thing that staff had worked with the applicant on in terms of what amendments needed to occur was removing the old reference to Schedule A, which with it came along with those old development plans from 2009. So that needed to be removed because any changes or deviations from those plans arguably would have meant that the development was not in line with the CD zone. So instead of having a CD zone that just as a generic reference to a schedule that includes plans and say everything needs to be done in accordance with these plans, staff had worked with the applicant to actually embed regulations respecting the conditions of use, the landscape requirements, parking, usable open space requirements, and then other regulations like projections, dark sky requirements into the zone itself, rather than having a generic reference to appended plans. Some of the other amendments to the zone also included reducing the requirement for the front yard setback adjacent to Downie Street from 6 meters to 2.1. And again, staff had worked very closely with the applicant and their consultant to ensure that these amendments are reflective of the current development proposal. And this does allow a little bit of flexibility should there be some changes in the plans that are minor in nature, given that they still would comply with the overall regulations. So when staff are evaluating the rezoning application, or the zoning bylaw text amendment application before you, we would look at the evaluation against parts 3 and 4 of the OCP, and staff have determined that the application does comply with the applicable policies, pursues a density that's consistent with what the land use, the T4 walk-up residential land use is identified as suitable for, pursues infill development form that's compatible with the surrounding development context. If you recall, there are townhouse developments on the adjacent side of the laneway. It diversifies housing market options that are beyond the typical single family. The frontage onto Downie Street with balconies and rear access does promote that eyes on the street design, which is reflective of SEPTED, being crime prevention through environmental design principles. And parking has been addressed with this proposal. 2 off-street parking stalls per unit are provided, as well as 2 common visitor parking stalls, which would equate to 0.5 visitor parking stalls per unit. So for those reasons, staff are supportive of the application and would be recommending that council consider first and second reading of zoning amendment bylaw number 2285, and that should second reading be granted, that council support scheduling a public hearing. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Mr. Simon, okay, council, can we get the first motion on the table, and then we can ask some questions here. Council Palmer. You're muted.
Sorry, there. That zoning amendment bylaw 2285 be read first and second time.
Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councilor Brooks Hill. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? Any questions for Mr. Simon? I look at this and I think this is a great way to use an irregular piece of property. This piece of property has been empty from the dawns of time. It was part of another piece of property just down the street on Downie, kind of on the far end. It's a great way of utilizing this space, great infill lot, and a great way of doing it. So I am definitely supportive of this moving forward with first and second reading. Any further comments, Mr. Palmer? You have your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I support of good work from the planning department, as you say, for helping the proponent to get a creative solution to the property. Just one comment from a perspective. If there was opportunity in situations like this for even higher density, I would tend to be supportive of that as well. And that's just to give an indicator of where my mindset is. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Palmer, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Elliott.
Just curious, is there opportunity to have rental suites in these units, these townhomes?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, staff had worked with the applicant to see what was possible on the site. It was ultimately determined that secondary suites would be very challenging due to the irregular shape of the lot, to include all components to address things like parking as well as mitigating impacts on adjacent properties. It would have been too much density for the site to actually be able to accommodate suites along with the other 4 units.
Yeah, I was just recalling, this came to council a while back, is that right?
Through your worship, I believe it was brought to Advisory Planning Commission prior to my time here. And at that time, the proponent was on the fence whether or not they were going to go forward with secondary suites. They had come forth with a plan for secondary suites. Staff worked with them. It was ultimately determined that it was too much for the site, and they had reverted back to an amended version of the original proposal with the 4 units. Yeah,
that's what I recall. I think it actually came to council as a development permit, the original version, and well, maybe not APC then, but I do recall talk about the suites in this unit, and it was, as long as the building code was met, that was the criterion that was forwarded at that time. But I guess they've gone back and modified their parking and felt it wouldn't work. So I understand. Okay, well, I'll be in favor of this as it is, okay. But I just want to make sure that if they did have parking, secondary suites could be considered in this space.
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, what staff are looking at when we're evaluating applications is the regulations contained in the OCP as well as the zoning bylaw to guide the development of the site. If secondary suites are proposed, it does increase the density, arguably beyond what would be permitted under that T4 walk-up residential land use. And then we would potentially be looking at OCP amendments and looking at a density that may not be in line with the character of the neighborhood. So as staff had worked through the application with the proponent, there were items beyond parking that posed to be challenging to accommodate a total of 8 units on the site.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillors, any other comments? Any questions? Councillor Charlotte?
Yeah, great. Just first, Your Worship, I also support this higher density infill. This is a great way to use this lot. It's really kind of interesting to see how it's coming together. Although I find it interesting that the kitchen is up on the top floor. But I don't think that's anything to do with what we have any say over. It's doing stairs with groceries. But I am curious as to what the potential for this lot is of short-term rentals, considering what we've been talking about, just to loop that conversation back in.
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, very cut and dry in this one. It's a comprehensive development zone. Vacation rentals, short-term rentals are not a permitted use. They will not be permitted on the site. If it ever was to be pursued, they would have to go through a zoning bylaw text amendment application, which would ultimately be brought back to council.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, I'll ask one last time. Any further comment? And I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2. Someone want to make that motion, please? Councillor Rind?
Yeah, that a public hearing for bylaw number 2285 be scheduled in accordance with S 465 of the Local Government Act.
Is there a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Elliott, any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item C, Economic Development, UBCM 2021 Poverty Reduction Planning Action Program Grant Opportunity. So I'm going to ask if there's a councillor that would like to put that on the table. Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, that an application for UBCM's 2021 Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program to update to the Revelstoke Community Poverty Reduction Strategy be supported.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Braun, do we have you here with us at this point?
Yes, and I would like to, through your worship, introduce our new Community Development Coordinator, Taha Atia, who's going to speak to this grant application.
Great. Taha, would you like to turn your camera on, please?
Should be on now.
Awesome. We've got you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. This request for support for an application to the Union of BC Municipalities 2021 Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program is a program created to support local governments in reducing poverty at the local level. Our intent is to apply to this funding stream, which provides an opportunity to update the Community Poverty Reduction Plan and align with the 2019 Poverty Reduction Plan, the provincial Poverty Reduction Plan, and find new ways to address the needs of the local community and address the economic and social impacts resulting from COVID-19. There's an additional need to realign the work of poverty reduction with growth and development of our local social sector organizations since 2012, when the first plan was created, and to recognize the repositioning of city staff support for social development. This proposal is being submitted with the intention of consulting local groups for their input during the grant writing process, and due to the timing of my hiring, it was not possible before now. We've met with the Social Development Committee and the collective impact groups only once so far. The grant proposal will be submitted with the express interests of those groups, and it will also enable the Social Development Committee to refocus efforts on poverty reduction in the wake of the pandemic, which has really substantially changed the metrics of poverty in our community. So support development services has also been will also be supported, and their planning initiatives through opportunities to ensure a poverty reduction lens is inherent in the OCEP update and built into the related policies.
Great. Thank you, Taha. Appreciate that input. We've come a long ways with poverty reduction in our community. Councillor Charlotte and I sat on the poverty reduction working group years ago, and we've seen that morph, and the social development group is morphing now, and Councillor Rind is sitting on that. So to see this come forward and actually see some things going to happen, I'm extremely excited about this. So thank you for doing this work, and bringing this motion forward. Any other comments or questions from other councillors? Councillor Elliott?
I'm just curious, the old poverty reduction strategy that we had initiated in 2012, how active was that referenced? Was there progress on it? What were successes?
Taha, any comment?
Yeah, in reviewing the 2012 poverty reduction plan, that really set the stage for collaboration and growth of a lot of the social sector organizations, to the point that there are many more dedicated staff working for them, that they have a reference to apply to other grant funding, that the high level priorities of the social sector are recognized by the community and by the municipality. And it's really quite an extensive and wide-ranging document. So as to specifics of progress, they're probably so wide-ranging that over the past 9 years, there's quite a bit that's went on. The only thing that this is looking to do is keep us in line with the provincial strategy and also keep us in line with the growth that has occurred, recognizing that 9 years is quite a long time and that opportunities like this do arise and require us to be able to substantiate the planning that we've done.
Okay. Councillor Chalette.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm glad to see this come forward. I'm looking forward to the meeting on Thursday with the Leadership Roundtable for Collective Impact as well, because I know, yeah, like you said, we've only been able to meet the once since you joined us, Taha, at least in this capacity. I'm interested to see how this goes forward. I don't think I have any particular question for now. I'm just going to be interesting watching this go forward, because especially with aligning with a provincial plan, I think Collective Impact has been interested in seeing a 5-year plan of where do we want to go. But I like that this looks at it from the other side, is where's the rest of the province going, so that we can align and make better progress and go faster to really have an impact, especially after this pandemic. There's going to be a lot of work to do, and it is going to look a lot different from when our original plan was done in 2012. I think a lot of those initiatives have moved far enough along. It's time to reset the goalposts. So thank you, Taha.
This is a great way as we move forward in having conversations with ministers of the provincial government almost on a weekly basis in some ways. And we're going to see things move quickly. So jumping on this and getting this moved forward is essential to us keeping up with the rest of the province. So I appreciate you doing that, Taha. Any other comments on the motion, Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I think similar to what we were talking about earlier on the funding opportunities, it's great to have all these in place, but I think tangible results and tangible actions are the big thing that have to come from it. So just having a way to evaluate whether they're successful or not is important. So rather than just throwing money or another plan, another study, another survey, doesn't seem to me like an effective use of money unless it's got some objective. And I hope this will have something concrete.
Yeah, absolutely. Prudent comment, definitely for those who sit around the collective impact table or the collective impact leadership table. This is what we've been working for a long time, as far as seeing some actionables and seeing things get done in the community. So I think this is a positive step forward, and facilitating this is a great move. Any other comments, Councillor Rund?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think some of the times these plans become the reason that we're able to get funding for other programs. So probably updating this will make us more eligible to, not necessarily just us, but other organizations able to get funding for the issues that relate to poverty.
Great, that's absolutely true. Any further comments before I ask the question? Okay, councillors, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to long-term financial plan. I'm going to ask for someone to put the motion on the table, and then we will have a conversation. Item number 1. Someone want to bring that forward, please? Councillor Brooks-Hill.
That the proposed 2021 to 2034 long-term financial plan be approved.
Is there a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor Chalette. Now, discussion on the motion. I'm just going to make a comment before we go on. I know Ms. McCabe's here. Do you have a formal presentation or something you want to say, Ms. McCabe? Then I'll keep my comments till afterwards. I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just going to share my screen so you can see my presentation. And you can see that in front of you?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So, good afternoon. Today I'm presenting to you the draft 2021 budget and the 2021 to 2035 long-term financial plan. I'm going to be reviewing the highlights of the long-term financial plan as well as the process that has gotten us to this point. So the process for 2021 to 2035 began last summer with the goal of minimizing the budget increases in 2020 because of the financial impact of COVID on the city's residents. In the fall, the department heads reviewed their operating and capital budgets with this goal in mind. And so starting in November of 2020, each department presented their budget proposal to the Finance Committee, during which time the committee asked questions and provided feedback to the department heads. In January, the committee reviewed the full operational budget for the general operations, along with recommendations from staff on service level reductions that could be made in light of the impact of COVID on how the city's recreational facilities operate and for future years. The plan before you reflects the results of this comprehensive review process. A few of the highlights. It is proposing a 0% tax increase for general operations. I do want to point out that in the 2020 to 2024 financial plan, there was a proposed 2.5% tax increase for 2021. So that has been reduced down to 0%. And that was done through a lot of efforts with department heads and with the Finance Committee. The plan also has no increases in utility fees in 2021. Those are staying the same as they were in 2020. There is a continuation in last year's budget process. Council approved a 2% tax increase that would be dedicated to the transportation infrastructure and rehabilitation of that, and that was approved for a 5-year period. So there is a continuation of this 2% tax increase that will be dedicated to repairing the city's aging transportation infrastructure. And then it also includes a reduction in operating hours at the community and aquatic center. In 2020 with COVID, there are already some impacts, and so those are reflected in the budget. And then in 2021, there'll be some further reduction. Some of those reductions will continue on into the future. So this here is a high-level look at the changes in the operating budgets and the impact on taxation. So this one here for revenues, we have a net increase in budgeted revenues, excluding property taxes, of $35,000. This is partly because of an increase in the budget for non-market change property taxes. There's also a bit of an increase in the budget for the PILTs that we receive. There's also the reductions in the budgeted revenues for the recreational facilities due to the decreased operational hours in 2020. And there's also a reduction in the budgeted revenues coming from investments. While there are still a few investments remaining at higher interest rates, the ones that matured in 2020 are definitely not earning the same interest rates that we were able to obtain a few years ago, unfortunately. So, and then if I look at expenditures, there's a net decrease of $18,000. The wages have been increased, so the budget impact of the increase for the 2% cost of living adjustment according to the collective agreement is $215,000. There's also an increased budget for equipment maintenance. There's a reduction to the debt payments required of $78,000 in 2021. There's also obviously a reduction in the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural budget for the COVID-19 impacts as well. And so that's resulting in that net budget reduction overall. And then finally, the other expenditures, this is reserve fund transfers. The increase is predominantly made up of, in fact, it's all made up of the transportation infrastructure reserve fund transfer increase. There is some reductions in a few other reserve fund transfers to reflect money that we are getting from different sources and the changes in that. So the actual transportation reserve fund increase is $313,000, and that is a 2% tax increase. So any questions before I go on?
Questions, councillors? Seeing none, carry on, Ms. McCabe.
Thank you. So this is just, this slide shows the budget changes by the different service areas. So we have general government, obviously you can see them, protective services and such. And so it shows you where the revenues are going up or down, and then the changes in the expenses. For the most part, the changes in expenses are wages and equipment maintenance costs. There are some changes in revenues as well, especially for the cost shared functions. Obviously, if their expenses go up or down, then the cost sharing revenue also moves with that as well. Trying to see if there's anything. No, so I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Questions?
Hearing none.
Hearing none, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So this slide shows the budget by expense type. I show this one because it's interesting to see that 50% of the budget is for wages and contract and professional services. And so that is a rather large, obviously a large chunk of what we spend. Also, 1/5 of the budget goes for paying for capital projects, either the debt payments that go towards paying for capital projects that were done in the past, or for capital projects in the future by transfers to reserves. And then this one, oops, sorry, one too many. This one here, this slide shows the budget by service area. So you can see that 1/5 of our budget is based on protective services, so that would be fire and police. Another 1/5 is spent on transportation services, so that's the roads and transit. And then another 1/5, again, like we talked about before, is to either pay for debt payments on prior capital projects or to put into reserves for future capital projects. And then the rest of them make up smaller percentages, as you can see on the screen. And this is the utility budget. So this one shows by expense type. Collection and distribution refers to sending the water out to homes, and then obviously collecting the wastewater at the other end. Treatment is for either making the water potable or treating the waste so it can be safely discharged. Debt servicing is about 10% of this budget. This includes the debt payments for the Thomas Brook and Big Eddy local area services. Of the total debt servicing, they make up $169,000 worth of those payments. And this here is showing the planned capital spending. So I thought I'd give a few highlights for the first 2 years of the plan. In 2021, we see a continuation of the rehabilitation of the roads. We see in the budget the OCP and zoning bylaw updates, and also the continuation of the wayfinding projects, which is RMI funded. We've also see in 2021 an addition of phase 1 for the school safety plans. This is for the signage and the engineered designs for changing the roads and the sidewalks and such. There's also upgrades to Williamson Lake buildings, which will be RMI funded. There's some new project for the Housing Action Plan, which is also partly grant funded. The DCC bylaw update is budgeted for in 2021, and there is also Greenbelt maintenance, which is budgeted for, that is also grant funded. In 2022, obviously, we see the continuation of the road rehabilitation program. The big jump in that year, though, would be for the arena roof replacement, which is budgeted to happen in 2022 now. And then there's also an increase in the stormwater system rehabilitation process, which hasn't been done in prior years to any large extent. And so there's a lot of catch up to be doing, and they're going to start that in 2022. So, and then we have the capital spending for the utilities. The big ones are the RMR reservoir upsizing. The city is contributing money towards that. Obviously, the continued rehabilitation of the distribution system for water assets, and then some asset data collection again. In the sewer fund, the big ones would be the lift station at Powerhouse Road, and there is in the budget in 2022 wastewater treatment plant upgrades, and so that is a project that a grant has been applied for, and if we get that, then it would be funded mostly by the grant, and then also debt funded as well. And obviously for the Big Eddy Waterworks, there aren't any major capital project at this point. It's now shifting into maintenance phase because the upgrade is complete. So here's the impacts on the 2021 budget. As we discussed, there's a 0% property tax increase proposed for 2021. This is for general operations. We have the second year of the 2% increase dedicated to road rehabilitation, and the 0% increase in utility fees. And so what does this look like for the average house? For the average home, the increase is $31, and that's on an annual basis. And so just for your information, the average valued home in Revelstoke for 2021 is valued at $545,000. Last year, it would have been valued at $495,000, and that is a 10% increase in assessment value. So this slide is going to show the impact of this tax increase on houses of different values. So I've used the same values as I have in prior years for consistency and because they're a good representation of the range of home values in Revelstoke. So the first one, of course, is the home that's worth $250,000. So if you had that home, you'd see an increase of $16 for your taxes for the year, which equates to $1.33 a month. Obviously, no increase in utility fees. If you had a home that's valued at $500,000, then you're going to see a doubling of that. So $32 a year is the annual increase, and then that works out to $268 a month. And then the assessed value for the $750,000 home, it would go up $48 for the year or $4 a month. So as explained, these increases are obviously based on homes that went up 10.1% over 2020's value. So if you had a house that was valued at $250,000 this year, it would have been valued 10% less last year. If your assessment went up more than 10%, you're obviously going to see a larger increase in this. And if your assessment went up less than 10%, then you're going to see a lower increase in this. Is there any questions, Your Worship?
Thank you, Ms. McCabe. Appreciate the presentation.
Oh, no, sorry, not done yet.
Okay. Well,
Sorry.
I see no further. I see no hands up. Mr. Councillor Palmer, he has his hand up. Councillor Palmer, you have a question. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So one question just at this point, since you're asking as we go through, I have a plethora of questions, but for the most part, I won't be asking them. Just on the clarity on, you talk about a 0% operational tax increase, but the reality is for the taxpayer, we're looking at a 2% tax increase, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So I understand, I think I understand the 0% operational statement. I think it's misleading. However, I should preface that good work on getting the operational increase to 0%. I know how hard that work is. Although you did have staff collectively had the advantage of having fairly significant operational increases in previous years, so it made that task quite a bit easier, I believe. But good job on getting it at 0%. But I really do have an issue with saying that there is in 2021 that there's a 0% operational increase, even though that statement by itself is correct. I think it's very misleading to the public because they don't see that difference. And so I essentially object to that. So that's just a statement on where we're at this point. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McCabe, carry on, please.
Yep, thank you. And so the next slide is showing the reserve funds, the balances projected for the ends of the next 5 years. There is a split into capital, utility, and restricted reserves. Obviously, as we've discussed in the past, the capital reserves are the ones used to repair, replace, and rehabilitate the city's buildings and roads and stormwater, etc. They're also used for new assets that are going to be used by all taxpayers. The utility reserves are used to obviously repair, replace, and rehabilitate the city's water and sewer utility assets. So each utility has its own reserve that is only used for its assets. And then the restricted reserves, that's the group of reserves that have limits on what they can be used for. So examples would be the land sale reserve, the cemetery reserve, and the electric utility reserve. So you'll see they are going up over time, which is positive. That's what we like to see. This is the...
Before we carry on, Ms. McCabe, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up. Do you have another question on this reserves and surpluses?
Sorry, Your Worship, I failed to take that down. No, I don't.
All right. Okay, thank you. Carry on, Ms. McCabe. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one is a graph showing the long-term debt that's outstanding at year end. So in 2015, there was a shift that was begun to move away from the use of long-term debt to fund large capital projects and to start building up reserves instead. And so this process has been challenging, but steady progress has been made in weaning the city off of debt. At the end of 2014, the city had outstanding long-term debt of $17 million. And at the end of 2020, that balance is now down to $9.3 million. The only new long-term debt since 2014 has been the money borrowed for the local service areas of Thomas Brook and the Big Eddy Waterworks. Similar progress has also been made with short-term borrowing for the purchase of vehicles and equipment. This shift started in 2017 when the amount owed was $1.5 million, and now it's down to $370,000. So while positive steps have been taken, the current long-term plan does require new debt to fund some much-needed upgrades that can't wait until the reserves are built up to pay for them. And so that would be in 2022 for the arena roof replacement and also for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, assuming we get the grant to complete that project. And so that would be an additional $7.2 million in debt for the arena and then $3.6 million for the wastewater treatment plant. And so this, before you, the resolutions to move the long-term financial plan process to the next stage. We would be doing a review of the tax distributions at the next council meeting, and then the one after that would be the approval of the public engagement document, also known as the budget guide, before the commencement of the public engagement period. And so at this point, Your Worship, this does conclude my presentation.
Great, thank you, Ms. McCabe. I know most of council have sat around the finance committee. There was 3 of us on the finance committee, but most councillors attended and have heard most of the report. Councillor Ryan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so in the council report, there's a mention that there's numerous plans of bylaw updates, including the zoning bylaw, DCC bylaw, housing action plan, asset management plans, and the school safety plan. Funded through reserves of $1.4 million between now and 2025. Why is 2025 there? That seems like it's far too far away for all of our liking.
Through Your Worship, it's because the final financial plan bylaw that council will be approving will be a 5-year bylaw. And so there's the long-term financial plan has 3 timelines built within it. The first is the budget year, which is 2021. Then you get the 5-year financial plan, which or financial plan bylaw, which is 5 years. So the first year to the 5th year, and then we have the long-term financial plan, which is the full 15 years from the beginning to the end. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But some of the highlights on that capital project lists aren't scheduled for over 5 years, which makes me believe that that means that we're planning to not do all of those things until 2025. I hope I'm not reading it right, though.
Through Your Worship, if I've said multiple years, then there actually is money in the budget for multiple years worth of work being done.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was hoping you wouldn't say.
It's often split evenly. For instance, in the case of the road rehabilitation, the pavement management program, that is fairly equal amounts over all of the years. Obviously, it increases as we go along. Yeah.
Okay.
Same with the storm water system. Most of that is actually in 2022. And the same with, well, Williamson Lake is 2 years, so.
At our last meeting, I'd also asked about that donations idea, and I would love to get an update on that.
Through Your Worship, we're looking at how we can make that happen and what the implications are and the processes for doing that on the tax notices for 2021. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Elliott. You're muted, Councillor.
Thank you very much for the report, Tanya. But I do have a couple of questions regarding the tax rates we had for the last 2 years. It was 6% 2 years ago, 4 last year, 4.5, and then the utility fees have gone up 15% over that same 2-year period. You know, on a recession year, overall recession, I would think we should be trying to mimic what's happening in our, or at least show responsibility to our community. So I know we're putting money aside for paving and the road maintenance, but you know, those are decisions where you know, I think as a community member, as a member of a struggling province and a struggling nation economically, we would show some reservation in increasing the cost of taxation. So I've been very vocal about keeping things at 0 for the year. Effectively, we're doing 2%. And that's why I probably won't be voting in favor of this resolution.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Palmer, then Councillor Rind.
Your Worship, is the motion on the table? I can't remember.
Yes.
Okay. So, Your Worship, I also won't be supporting this motion. I believe it should be at most 0%, the tax increase. I've expressed some concern about the creating an illusion of a 0% when the reality there is a 2%, and basically echoing Councillor Elliott's concerns on this. Having said that, I recognize, other than, well, I'm not sure where the rest of council is going. I'm probably the odd person out, even though I've been following fairly intently, and I've spent even in the last a few days here, many hours sort of poring over the financial plan and including comparisons to last year. There's many questions, but I think at this late of the game, I'll keep most of those to myself, but we'll be bringing them up as we go through the budget process as we continue into 2022. But if the budget's anything more than 0%, I will not be supportive of it, and I've made that a campaign promise as well. So I think that's all I have at this point. I will have a few other questions later on.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Rind.
Yeah, I'm in support of this. I think we've done a good job. I actually think that in terms of the raises that we could have passed, I personally would have been probably in favor of a higher increase than 2%. So this is a compromise. For me, I just feel like, when you kick the can further down the road, there's all this infrastructure that needs to be maintained, and it's not going to pay for itself. So I'm in support of this. I think it's a nice idea to want to keep things at 0%, but the reality of saving, somebody $10 now versus that $10 compounded for however many years times all those residences and all the things that we need to upgrade, it seems very short-sighted. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Rind, for your comments. Councillors, any further comments? Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a second. I'm in agreement with Councillor Rind. I think we've worked really hard on this. I think that separating the 0% operational increase versus the 2% that's investing in our roads and our transportation infrastructure is a really important message to highlight to our community. I think that there's quite a few people that have been watching the work being done over the last several years and several council terms with decreasing that debt and making sure that we're investing more in reserves to be able to pay for this stuff up front and maintain our infrastructure. I think this is the good work that we can be highlighting, and it is important to continue without doing a 0% increase just to feel better about it. This is an important investment for our community.
Okay.
So I'll be voting in support.
Thank you for your comment. Any comments, Councillor Brooks-Hill?
Well, basically, I appreciate the comments on both sides, and I'm a little bit torn. I would have liked to see 0%, but the fact that the 2% is going towards the transportation infrastructure, I think if we're going to be spending money, that's definitely where it should be going. In the long term, we need to invest in our roads now, or we're going to pay more later. And the idea of borrowing money to rebuild roads, I really can't wrap my head around. However, in the interest of throwing it out there, I'd be happier with a 1% increase in the transfer reserves if there's any appetite for that. Kind of split the difference a little bit.
So Councillor Brooks-Hill, having sat around the Finance Committee table for weeks and discussing what the best way moving forward is, I'm definitely supportive of the 2% for roads. I think we've seen in the past what's happened when we don't put money into our infrastructure, and then things just continue to cost. And we saw that down in Lower Town where things were delayed and finally done. So I'm definitely supportive of this, and the fact that our staff have gone out of their way to make sure that things have been reduced in other areas so that we're not putting a financial burden or a great financial burden on our community. I'm definitely supportive of this moving forward. I understand where you're coming from at 1%, but definitely we had worked hard around that finance committee table to come up with that 2% to make sure that we were getting proper funding into our road maintenance program. So I'm definitely supportive of that moving forward. So Councillor Elliott, you have a comment?
Can you tell, sorry, Tanya, are you able to summarize the total reserves that we have right now?
Through your worship. Well, if I could just a minute. Right, Jaylene, is it okay if I share my screen again and go back to that slide?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. So that is actually the total. So 3, 4, 5, 3,000 for general capital, 2,000 to go towards the utility stuff things, and then there's another 7,000 or 7 million, sorry, in restricted reserves. So most 12. Of that is tied up in the land sale reserve and the electric utility reserve, which between them are about $3.5, $4 million of that, perhaps. I'd have to actually look at the specific numbers. Sorry.
So you're saying $13 million in the reserve this year, right now?
I am, but it's not 13 million available to fix roads, unfortunately. I wish it was.
No, 13 million, and then next year we're going to have 14 million.
Actually, no, it goes down a bit because we're spending a bunch of money in 2021. Oh, my years are out by one. Sorry, these dates are wrong. 2021, 2022, 3, 4, 5. My apologies.
Okay, yeah. So
yeah,
where are we at
it does
here?
Go down. 20. So, I'm sorry, the dates are wrong. So just the first columns are 2020, and then it's 2021.
Right. Okay. So we have 14 million dollars in reserve in 2021 right now.
At the end, well, we're in. You're talking about at the beginning of 2021, then that would be the end of 2020. So these are ending balances.
Okay.
So it's 12.5 million at the end of 2020. Or sorry. Yeah, my apologies. Just a minute. Let me just go to my spreadsheets because that does seem to be. I'll just go back to the yes. Graph I'm looking for.
So the dates are wrong, is that right? So 2020.
I'm actually just double checking because I actually think that the dates are right. Sorry, I thought I was showing you 5 years, but I'm actually only showing you 4 years. So my apologies. It is 2020 at the end of 2021. What you see on the screen at the end of 2020, the budget, the reserves will have 7 million in restricted, 2.3 million in utilities, and 3.1 in capital reserves.
Okay. At the end of next year, we're up $1 million.
6.7, 2.7, 3.9, and 6.7. Yeah, because the utility reserves are going up. So the capital reserves go down, but the utility reserves go up.
And then 2022, we're up to 15 million, roughly, or 15 million. So up 2 million.
Capital reserves are, yes, because the utility reserves are jumping up quite a bit at that point.
So over the last 3 years, sorry, Tanya, over the last 3 years, can you tell me how much general surplus revenue we took into reserves?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'd have to get back to you on that one. Sorry, I don't. Yeah.
Significant. 500. I think the last time we went through the finance committee, it was around $500,000 that was contributed from 2020 into the capital reserve. That was surplus.
The surplus from our operations, you mean? Like the accumulated surplus? The year-end surplus?
Yes.
Possibly. I'd have to look at the financial statements for 2019. I can't tell you 2020 because we haven't done the financial statements for 2020 at this point.
Yeah, so our contribution to the reserve is steadily growing and proportionally growing. And I'm just curious, do we need to do that again in a bad year?
So, through your worship, my comment would be that yes, it is growing, but we're also spending it. So it's going into the reserves, but it's coming out of the reserves at the same rate or just a little bit less. So yes, if we put 3 million in, we may take out 2 million or 2.5 million on capital projects. So we're putting it in, but then we're taking it back out again to spend it on capital projects. So if we don't put it in, we can't do the capital projects without borrowing.
So typically on a down year, some governments actually stall capital projects and postpone them to the next year. Is that right?
Possibly, yes. I don't know what other governments do. Sorry.
Yeah, some people stall, some people lay off, some people do a bunch of different things to combat a down year. And to me, I don't think we've done that. And I've been trying to bang my head against it. I'm trying to say, okay, we can increase the reserves 2% for roads and stuff, but is that the best policy? And that's where I'm coming from. I don't think it is in this year, and that's why I'm standing behind.
Fair comment, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Elliott on that. The question for the Director of Finance, so we have the fairly large, you might disagree on the large, but there's large sums of money there. What kind of rates do we get on our investments sort of typically?
Historically, we've been averaging about 2.5%, 3%. But unfortunately, a lot of those, some of those investments did mature in 2020. And so at this point, I'm looking at rates of return of around maybe 1.25%.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So just a cautionary note, and this might be for future discussions, but we can grow reserves and have large sums of money, but if that money is with inflation can be contracting in its value. And so there is a balance, and to have all the money, it's a bit of to have all the money ready to put forward for infrastructure projects, or even 50% may be unwise. And so there's this balance between borrowing and having a whole bunch of money in reserves. And the other thing is this 2%. Last year, I believe we had 2% as well, through Your Worship. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that 2% was 2% last year. It is still 2% today, this coming year. It wasn't just a one-off and then you subtracted it, correct?
No. Ms. McCabe, can you weigh in, please?
So yes, we did 2% last year. So if we were doing $1 million, we added 2% to that. So now we have the new amount. Now we're adding another 2% to that.
So it's a compound 2% essentially that's happening over those 2 years.
Exactly. And that's what we do with the budget for the road maintenance as well. We increase it by 2% every year.
So saying this idea that if we didn't have that 2%, that extra reserve putting in there, we still have money coming in that was not coming in previous years because of that cumulative effect. And I think we're really missing the impact. It's great for the reserves, for building up the reserves, really, really important to do that. I get that, and very effective on that. But we're not looking at the cumulative effects of taxation on businesses. When does that become the straw that breaks the camel's back? Sorry for cliches. There is this other consequence of having too high taxation, and that's why I'm opposed. And I agree with Councillor Elliott, especially this year. It's not about sort of wishy-washy, wishing it was 0%. I quite frankly think it should be much less than 0% because we have the room to do that. Just another question through Your Worship again for the Director of Finance. The capital projects that are scheduled for 2021, are they going to be complete? What's budgeted? Will that money be spent by the end of 2021?
Through your worship. Yeah, sorry, through your worship. That is that's what's been budgeted. And so yes, like in 2020, where the predominant, especially the road works, were all completed. The expectation is that they would all be completed as well in 2021.
So you're talking specifically on the roads?
Any of the capital projects. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the end of the year, so all the capital projects in 2020 were complete?
Not because of COVID. No, COVID threw a bit of a loop into the processes for 2020, unfortunately. And so that is creating some challenges.
Right. And of course, if we went back historically, we'll see that over time. So again, further to Councillor Elliott, we're still in COVID stuff. You know, are those going to be the excuses? Should we be retracting? The other thing, I've already stated it, but the arena roof, I think that's not a prudent use of money in the financial plan. Anyway, I think that's sufficient, Your Worship. I think my message is pretty clear there, and I won't occupy an excessive amount of time because I know there's been previous discussion on a lot of this. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments, councillors? Seeing none, go Councillor Brookshill and then Councillor Ryan.
Well, I know that some of the roads projects this year actually came in under budget. So given that, I do feel like we can continue to reach our targets for funding the transportation reserve while limiting the increase. And I'd also note that there's only 6 votes here today, so a split vote would throw things into disarray.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if there is anyone who'd be willing to compromise on a 1% increase.
Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think I would be willing to compromise only because I think that Tim made a great point about inflation that had escaped me, but it is a scary thought that all of our money in reserves is just sitting there earning 1.25%. So I'm in favor of that.
Councillor Elliott.
Could I add to some of the discussion? You could probably borrow at 1.2% right now from our municipal funder. So so if you're sticking money in the bank and getting 1-2%, you could borrow for the same amount. So there's no real gain either way. I can probably get 5%, $100 million or $10 million. I'm pretty sure that's easily attainable if you took a little bit of risk. But borrowing at 1% is a simple solution if you need to fund some things. So I just think money is so cheap right now for borrowing. And I also would say that we're building a transportation plan based on 10 years ago. So our demands for transportation will change. And the needs for paving and the needs for sidewalks and all this, we're going to have a different design here in the next little while once we have this transportation plan in place. So, or that's what I will push for anyway. And I think if we're continuing on the same path, budgeting 2% increase in our transportation fees for the next 5 years, we are taking a step that maybe is not necessary.
Ms. McCabe.
Sorry, through your worship, I think I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. It'll come back to me and I'll put my hand up again.
Okay. All right. Any further comments? So basically, we have 2% for roads in the proposed long-term financial plan for 2021. Seems to be a contentious issue for some of the councillors. We sat around the finance committee table. We hashed this over. We talked about this. We asked if this money was going to be spent. We talked about how it would be spent, and and the fact that we were behind getting a lot of the work done. And so we felt at that finance committee that we were doing the appropriate thing by agreeing to 2%. And so now we get into council chambers and we have the discussion about maybe there's other ways of coming about this. And we asked the staff that, are there other ways of us getting there? And so within all of the other departments, there was ways of getting it done. But having roads, spending $2 million on roads gives us a few blocks of paving and getting some sidewalks done, that sort of thing. I still think at this point, it's a minor amount going forward. And I look at even in my own financial ability, am I concerned about taxes being raised? Absolutely. But I think the prudent thing to do is, even during COVID, even during these hard times, is to make sure that we set the city up to move forward with getting some of this work done, even though there is money in the reserves for other things and some money, and you're talking about interest rates and how we get better reserves. And so I look at that and go, Ms. McCabe, we've had this conversation in your office talking about how we get the best money for our best bang for our money in investments, and you've been doing an appropriate thing with that. So I'm satisfied with that. So at this point in time, I'm still supportive of 2%. So I'm going back to councillors here. What do you think? No comments. Councillor Brooks Hill.
I'm willing to put forward an amendment. I'm not sure how to word it, but essentially to change the increase to the transportation reserve from 2% to 1%.
Okay.
I'd second that.
And Councillor Rind is seconding that amendment. So councillors, we might as well, any comment on that amendment? Councillor Charlotte.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just to weigh in here, I agree. I think we've hashed this out quite a bit. I appreciate we have a new voice at the table. Councillor Palmer, it's great to have you here, and you bring some really good insight. I look forward to the conversations over the next year. This 2% increase for transportation infrastructure was pegged, I believe it was 5 years in a row at 2% increase to get us where we need to be. And even then, it wasn't where we need to be, it's just closer. I think that having this conversation about changing that is definitely a worthwhile conversation to be had, but I would rather have it as part of the next budget cycle. I would support the 2% increase as it stands now.
Okay. Councillor Palmer, you raised your hand.
I'll support the amendment. Just a qualifier there, I still won't be supporting the final resolution, but I think it's a movement in the right direction. And I think it will address Councillor Brooks Hill's concern about a split vote as well. And just one other comment, Your Worship. I think I was reading Tanya's mind about risk investments. Municipal finance people are very, very conservative, and for good reason. Thank you.
All right, let's carry on. So any further comments on the amendment? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for you to vote on the amendment. You're reducing the infrastructure for roads from 2% to 1%. So all those in favor? Councillor Elliott, what are you voting? You're muted.
So we're voting in favor or against?
You're in favor or against moving from 2% to 1%? So let me ask the question again. So we're going to vote on the amendment, which is moving the amount of money for the roads from 2% to 1%. So I will ask again, and the reason I didn't see you raise your hand, so I was probably premature in that. So I'll ask that question. All those in favor of the amendment 2% to 1%, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed. So Councillor Charlotte and Mayor Sulz are opposed. Now this amendment has been put forward by 4 councillors. So Councillor Elliott, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Brooks Hill, and Councillor Ryan have voted in the affirmative. So we're now voting on moving the financial plan from or for 2021 to 2034 long-term financial plan, approving that so that we can move forward. So we're voting on that. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. And opposed? Okay. So Councillor Elliott and Councillor Palmer are opposed. Councillor Brooks Hill, Councillor Ryan, Councillor Charlotte, and Mayor Sulz are in favor of moving this forward. Okay. Okay. So now we're going on to part number 2. Let the staff prepare the public guide. Will someone put that motion on the table? Councillor Charlotte. You're muted.
All right. That staff prepare the public guide based on the approved 2021-2035 long-term financial plan.
Okay, is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Brooks Hill? Okay, Councillor Elliott, you faded out and then came back in. So, okay. So any discussion on this motion? Councillor Palmer?
Your Worship, just looking at when I was reviewing the document, and I believe that's what we're talking about is the long-term financial plan report that we have that was included in our agenda. Is that part of that public engagement piece? That's a question. I guess.
Ms. McCabe, could you weigh in, please?
Through your worship, no, there's actually a shorter version of it. I think last year we called it the budget guide. So it's a condensed version of that so that the general public doesn't have to read close to 100 pages, just for you guys, the 100 pages.
Yeah, and the odd taxpayer out there. Yeah, that's correct. I forgot about that because I was looking and I didn't look at detail. So we don't have a draft of that smaller document this year, do we? Or already at this point, or you'd be just preparing that?
Through your worship, we're just preparing that now, but the intention is to keep it similar to what was done last year.
Okay. And your worship, just on the bigger document, one thing I did note going through it, there was quite a few typo errors from last year, as little structural errors, and you caught a whole bunch of those, I noticed, but then there was quite a few new ones. One thing that I noted that's, and I don't know if this is in the smaller guide, but on the long, the 103-page document on the last year's, there was a page 24, and it shows on the table of contents on this year's, but it shows that it's not there, and that's because it's not there. And I think that's an important piece of information. That's the general operating fund budget comparison. I think that's a critical piece of information. I would like to see it actually expanded out over at least 3 years. So looking back 2 years and ahead for the current year, so we have a better sense of how the increases are really happening. So that's one piece. If that's in that smaller document, I would like to see it anyway, because I think it encapsulates that on one sheet, a better sense of what's happening with the increases.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. Okay. Any further discussion on the public guide? Okay. I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous in favor. Thank you, Council. Okay. We're going to move on to fire ESS. So if someone want to put this motion on the table, please. Councillor Ryan.
That the City of Revelstoke supports the submission of a regional application to the 2021 ESS grant intake submitted by the CSRD on Revelstoke's behalf. If approved for funding, Revelstoke supports the CSRD to manage the grant project and be the recipient of Revelstoke's portion of the grant funds.
Okay, seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any comments on the motion? Chief DeRossi is here. Chief, I'll let you speak to it. I have been sitting on the CSR Day table, and I will have a few comments as well, but also I've been involved in ESS for a long time.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship. This is a continuation of a project I believe was begun in 2019. And what you see before you in the report is that the CSRD is the lead on this project. They have had great success with the other communities under their umbrella for the ESS. And this continuation is to finally capture the Golden area and the Revelstoke area. So they are the lead applicant. They will manage this on behalf of Revelstoke as well as Golden, and we will be the recipients of their kind generosity and assistance.
Great, thank you, Chief. Councillors, every community is mandated by EMBC to have an emergency plan, and a lot of our emergency stuff is designated to CSRD, and they've been incredibly good at getting a lot of stuff done for us in the last 2 years, including training and support, and making sure that we were all on board as far as having volunteers and people to run our emergency program, in addition to the city staff and the fire staff who do great work with this. So I believe this is a great way of getting some funding so that they can continue to do the work and make sure that we're taken care of in case there's any issues in the community, whether it be wildfire, floods, earthquakes, mudslides, that sort of thing. And having the people in place, trained and ready to go is an incredible thing. So I'm encouraging every one of you to vote in favor of this. Is there any comments? Councillor Palmer.
Okay, am I on? Yeah. So a couple questions, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the presentation and the work on that. 2 questions. It's more for the public, I think. One is our emergency resource center, I have the wrong title there. Is that still at the airport?
Yes, and we have a backup one at our fire training center.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then the other question is, how confident do we feel if there was a major event that occurred today, say an airplane flew into town or something?
That we could handle it? I'm extremely confident, but I'll get Chief DeRusse to weigh in on that from his perspective.
Through Your Worship, yes, if you're speaking specifically to supporting the people who are affected by a large event, the ESS team is well trained. I know they want to do better, and they do need more equipment to support a larger scale event. In the sense of an aircraft crash, if you're talking about the largest flight that might come into Revelstoke for fire, medical, all that sort of stuff, it's going to be, a community is going to be stretched because hopefully we don't do this every day. But I have every confidence in the team would be able to handle the situation to adapt and recover to whatever it does occur. We're hoping that it doesn't happen, but in terms of this particular scenario where an airplane comes in, it's definitely something that the teams could handle. We have a lot of well-trained people and a lot of support that we can call in.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Councillor Elliott.
So the reading through the document here, there's equipment as the end result that's coming to our community. What are we actually obtaining from this?
Councillor DeRusse.
Through Your Worship, it's a little bit both. It's mostly equipment, but there is also some funding in there to bring the specialists in to train and assist people in learning how to use that equipment and make sure that it's set up and working properly as it is expected to be.
So is this IT or computer items that we're obtaining, or what is it?
So we're looking at some laptops. We're looking at a cellular Wi-Fi for connectivity. We're looking at a variety of computer peripherals, as well as either cell phones or VoIP phones that would support all of these, both in a larger scale event and also in a mobile situation, either individually or as a group, where ESS is part of the team that supports wildfire evacuations, for example, with registrations and referrals. So it's equipment and training on how to use it for a variety of different events. Some of the work will be done from in-house. So we've got IT people that would be setting up and making sure the VoIP phones or the cell phones are working properly. They've got the right accounts and all that sort of thing. And then the teams of specialists coming in from out of town to make sure that they know how to use the equipment to support the ESS modernization project that was started in the province. So that's taking it off paper, putting it into electronic means so that registrations are handled much more quickly and efficiently as well.
May I continue, Your Worship?
Yes, carry on.
So, do you feel we're in a deficit at this point, or are we vulnerable, or is this just an enhanced enhancement of our services?
Vulnerable in what manner, sir?
Well, I mean, well, if we're getting this new equipment, what are we missing it right now? Is it just money spent because we can?
Through your worship, this is a project to again bring the ESS up to date from the old triple carbonless copies, registering perhaps several hundred or more people into electronic version, so that it's captured much more quickly and databases are much more secure and personal information is kept private while supporting those people that are in emergency need. So this is equipment that's required to utilize and maintain that electronic system rather than the paper versions. It's not really because we want to, it's because the province is moving in this direction, and if we're going to serve the people in emergency situations, this is the process and the equipment needed to do that.
So, Councillor Elliott, if I could just weigh in a little bit, having been involved in the wildfire situation a few years ago in Kamloops, and actually sitting down in front of people and sitting and writing their information out on forms, as Chief DeRosa is saying, in triplicate, and making sure it goes to the right direction and making sure that they get the service and the needs that they're provided. I want to elaborate just a little bit more. So when we walked away from being in Kamloops and helping out on foot, and people were now dispersed into smaller communities so that they could be safe and have be close to family. That sort of thing was being done now here in our community, and I was handling that on the ground, meeting the people wherever, whether it be my office or elsewhere, to do the same thing. And having this electronic database meant that that would have helped everyone to know that these people had been taken care of, that they didn't drop off the face of the earth. Where did they go? What happened to them? So the electronic thing, having that background, is just basically bringing us up to today's standards so that we know where these people are. We know if they've been helped, and if they haven't been helped, then when they do get help, we know that they're taken care of. And this is just it's an absolutely mandatory thing. This isn't us reaching out and saying, geez, we can find some money to do what we want. This is the government saying, we're mandating this stuff. If you guys don't have that now, we're going to actually have some funds available, apply for it, and let's see if you guys can be brought up to speed. So I'm just encouraging, that's kind of what we're looking at here. Any further comments? Okay, I'm going to ask the question, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chief DeRosa. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for being present at this late hour. And thank you, councillors, for supporting this.
Hey,
I want to go.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
It's not related to this, but the search and rescue can we get a quick update on where we're at with that lease?
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that as we move forward in later in our program.
Okay.
Okay. And so we'll talk about that. trust me, we'll get to that here in a bit. Okay. Okay, 11F, grant application, engineering map application support. Mr. Black, you're here.
I am, Your Worship.
Okay. Do you want to bring that forward? Do you want me to put the? Let me see where this motion is. I don't have it anywhere, so let's just move forward and you can talk about it, and then we can talk about bringing that motion forward to support this.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council, and thank you for accommodating this late request to get on the agenda tonight. This is a request that by council resolution that staff has authorized to submit a grant to the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund to update our floodplain mapping within the community, which will be supportive of emergency preparedness, allowing us to adapt to and manage the effects of climate change, and manage and maintain our assets in a way that is expected of this community. The last floodplain mapping was completed in the early 80s, about the time when the powerhouse at Revelstoke Dam was completed. And that mapping was completed by the province and due to a flood that occurred in 1983. Given the development that has happened in the community, the amount of materials that are moved down the Silhouette River, the Jordan, we have better data points now so that we can establish whether or not our dikes are at the right elevations, that the capacity of the river channels is adequate in order to move a flood event through the city, and establish the floodplain elevations which affect development in the areas near to these rivers. It is a grant application. We believe it's necessary at this point in time to support the community. It's also will support the OCP update and support development services in ensuring that single-family homes and projects that are adjacent to rivers are constructed and protected from flooding.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Black. So in your chat box, Ms. Floyd just sent around the suggested resolution. Someone want to just check that, and then let's put the resolution on the table, and then we can ask questions. Somebody have that, or do you want me to
put it up on the screen?
Yep,
Maybe
I can do it here.
Okay.
I've got it. That the submission of a grant application to the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for $88,500 to complete a flood mapping assessment be approved.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Rind. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Black's made it very clear about getting some mapping done, dealing with floods, so that we know where we're at and to try and mitigate that. So some funding available. It is a grant application. Any comments or questions? Councillor Elliott?
Sorry, just curious, if the grant wasn't available, would we spend the money?
At this point in time, I would say, given the current workloads and demands on staff, we would probably not pursue this at this time. However, it's an opportunity that getting roughly $90,000 is an opportunity that the staff cannot justify not chasing in order to further enhance our resilience as a community. And quite honestly, as a tourist community, it's in our best interest to always be looking out for mitigating all of these events. So that's the reason we're pushing this forward, Councillor Elliott.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? I'm definitely supportive of this. There's a grant application. If we can get the money and we can move forward with this, then I think it's the appropriate thing to do. So I'm going to ask a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Next, we're going into correspondence. Thank you, Mr. Black. Appreciate your time and being here. I just want to take a couple-minute break again for the washroom, and then we'll carry on. Okay, let's carry on with item 12A, Revelstoke Community Housing Society Micro Home Initiative. There's a motion on the table just to basically provision of city land in principle. We're not going to discuss the regulatory process or what we're going to do. I just would like to put the motion on the table and refer it to staff. So, someone want to put that motion forward, please? Councillor Rind.
That the request for the provision of city land in principle from the Revelstoke Community Housing Society dated February 5th, 2021 be referred to staff and for consideration according to required regulatory processes.
Okay, seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any brief discussion on the motion? Councillor Brooks Hill and then Councillor Rind.
I'm just curious about a sort of a general idea about the timeline for when staff thinks they might have something for us.
Well, first we need to refer it to them, and that's the process today. And then they would be able to give us an idea of time, unless, Ms. Lowe, there's some suggestion of that at this point.
No, Your Worship, I wouldn't have a timeline, but it would be, you know, within the next couple of council meetings.
Okay, that's enough for me.
Okay.
Councillor Rind?
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question about timelines. Like, I'm just in full support of this. I'm excited to see it come forward. I think it's a great project to try, and I think they'll learn a lot from it. So it'll be interesting to see how we can get this project moving forward, and I'm looking forward to seeing it soon, hopefully at the next council meeting.
All right. Thank you. Any further comments? Okay. All those in favor? It's approved. Moved forward unanimously. Thank you. 13 communications. Number A, Revelstoke Chamber of Commerce letter. Ms. Braun and Ms. Mays, you're going to give us a verbal on this?
Your Worship, we have a presentation to share.
All right. Thank you.
And I'm just requesting control of the screen. Do you see it now?
Nope.
You should have control.
Okay. Sorry, I just gotta. And there we go, right?
There we go. We've got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So Jamie Mays, our Economic Development Officer, and myself are going to just walk you fairly quickly through the key issues that we're working on now with the Recovery Task Force, and we'll share some of the data and information we've gathered to date and the impacts on different sectors of the economy over the past year. And we'll talk about in brief some of the responses that we've developed so far. Some are underway, some are coming up, and we'll be likely back again another 6 months to a year to give you the full recovery strategy as it's evolving. So key issues we're looking at as a task force, and I want to emphasize this is a collaborative response. So the other partners at the BVIC, the Business and Visitor Information Center, include Community Futures, Chamber of Commerce, the Idea Factory, the Basin Business Advisor Program, and Tourism Revelstoke. So, you know, when we talk about the issues we're working on in collaboration, that's who we're mainly talking about with the guidance and input from the Recovery Task Force as more of a think tank. So I've kind of tried to break it into different categories. So safety, compliance, and resources, that's been dealing in the very, very short-term immediate need to ensure that businesses have their safety plans in place and they have access to resources to support the financial resilience. So we're working on that with a number of different programs through CF and the Chamber of Commerce. Research and data collection. We are wrapping up a community wellness survey. We'll be sharing the results with council in the next month or so. We also have some TELUS Insights data to share that will bring us up to present time in terms of the drop-off and visitation in the community. We're working with BC Stats on ensuring that we can look at some sector impact analysis, and we have survey results that have come in from the CF survey, from our wellness survey with service providers and the community at large. So business resources that we are working on include some of the efforts put out by CF, including the Review for Business, business retention and expansion programs, investor resources, and Chamber of Commerce workshops. We'll get into more of this in a bit more detail. Infrastructure funding is another big area we're working on. A lot of funding, as you know, is flowing through the province and the federal government right now, and we've applied to at least 5 infrastructure funds, and there's more on the way. And we'll be able to share the results of those grant applications over the next month or so, and the benefits of those grants to supporting job creation, recovery of the tourism sector, investment in our infrastructure, and our long-term economic growth and resiliency. Technology adaptation, that's a key one. The pandemic has shown us one thing, it's the ability to work from home and work remotely, which not only supports our business recovery, but also helps us attract that I guess digital nomads is a name for them, or that resident attraction piece that people are finding communities like Revelstoke a good place to live because they can take their work with them. And then last of all, the Recovery Task Force is really focused on what demand can we forecast for the spring and summer season and what are the options we have to close some of the gaps we've identified. TELUS data, this cannot be, it hasn't been fully studied yet or analyzed, but some of the highlights show last May we had a decrease of over 40% compared to May 2019, which is to be expected. If you look within that information, the one-night trips had decreased by a higher amount, close to 50%, where multi-night quality trips decreased by about 41.8%. But August visitation in 2020 was higher than 2019 by over 123,000 people coming through the community. I think that shows the results of some of the efforts on staycations and interprovincial travel. That increase of 23% continued in September, 23.6%, whereas by December, those shorter trips, that's 8 to 24-hour trips, and the quality trips had dropped by 46 and 62% respectively, which shows the greatest impact on our tourism economy, as well as our retail and hospitality sectors. Our share of BC residents visiting Revelstoke in August increased by 51.8 thousand, about 30% higher than August 2020. And what that speaks to is what we can expect to see as restrictions loosen again. By the summer, perhaps, as the vaccination rollout continues, we could be seeing that huge increase in BC residents, although that does offset the lack of international and American visitors that we're seeing to the community. And again, those longer trips, the multi-night quality trips, had increased by over 21% by August, but December had decreased by 48%. So just to give you some of the background on which the tourism sector is operating, other key data that we're looking at the Recovery Task Force level is our Wellbeing Survey, which we'll leave and bring that back to Council sometime in the next month or two. We have a Chamber of Commerce survey that was done in collaboration with Black Press Media. That's attached to your correspondence tonight, so I won't speak to that. And then we've also worked with our tech strategy coordinator to undertake a Revelstoke tech worker survey. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to give you just the highlights from that, and then she'll lead you through the next couple of slides.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Braun. So in our tech worker survey, the goal of this was to measure the size and breakdown of Revelstoke's tech industry as compared to a survey done in 2018. And even though we had a small response rate of 58 participants, we did still see a 16% increase in those identifying as being a tech worker in Revelstoke. So we feel like that's some good news. Some of this growth can be attributed to the growth of Revelstoke's biggest tech employer, which is Chronometer, and they've doubled in size since the last survey. It also was aiming to identify individuals who can support the community in digital adoption and tech skills growth. And this list that was generated, 63% of our respondents were willing to join a tech worker list that we could use with our business advisors to help link our businesses with local contractors and businesses to provide these tech adoption services. So with recent government programming rollouts, this list has been really helpful. And we also aim to understand the challenges facing the tech sector. And so we really did see through COVID, this survey being done, there's a desire for more collaboration and networking opportunities in the sector. So we're starting to explore how we can do this in a virtual way. And as things hopefully start to open up, how we can facilitate that support going forward. The next sliding.
Yeah, I'm trying to, it's not, sorry about that. I think my screen is frozen. Oh dear. Okay, while I work on that, go ahead, Jamie.
All right, we'll go ahead. So the next slide is, there we go, economic impacts on business. So at this point, local level data has been gathered primarily from convenience sample surveys and qualitative data from surveys mentioned on the previous slide, as well as Community Future has done some outreach surveys to businesses, and they had their outreach contractor provide some general insight back to our business development team, and our business basin advisor has provided some really great qualitative input. And with this feedback, what we're seeing is that it's evident there's an uneven impact being experienced across our industry sectors. General comments that we're hearing tell us that businesses are in a holding pattern. There's a fatigue from COVID and this uncertainty. And especially for many of our businesses, the uncertainty about travel for summer and what to expect in the short and medium term is really hindering any future business planning. On a national level, we see data that can be approximated to our local level, and this illustrates that business closures and job losses have been less severe in sectors that could quickly adapt to remote work and online transactions. And in contrast, sectors that require close contact and the people who work in the close contact businesses have been the hardest hit. So these are mostly service industries whose workers are often women, youth, and low-wage earners, and they have really borne the brunt of the impact and the risks associated with COVID. We are seeing that business confidence and investment remain apprehensive. This is mostly due again to that uncertainty of the future course of the pandemic and the vaccine rollout and the timeline associated with this. And these factors will continue to be a challenge for the economy, and particularly in sectors that involve close contact. And we have seen an 11% increase in our business licenses year over year as of December 31st, 2020. So this indicator could tell us that self-employment and entrepreneurship has become a means for self-reliance and personal independence, and maybe some of that quality of life. Or it could be that compliance for qualifying for government financial supports has enticed this uptick in licenses. But staff is definitely going to be working to go into this business license data and try to build out how this aligns with industry coding and identify emerging gaps and opportunities and sector-specific business cycles.
Great. So I'll just, what we've tried to do is capture some of the key issues that are more short-term to medium-term issues. So in the area of health and wellness, we see the mental toll on entrepreneurs and employees, both reflected in the CF Business Survey and our Community Wellness Survey. We see local data on outbreaks, variant transmission, sources, vaccination rates, etc., being an issue. And we have the issue of how do we restore public confidence in common spaces as we're coming out of the pandemic. Around issues related to access to working capital and labor, there are local businesses that require support and investment to survive. And that's just the bottom line. They will not make it without that support that we're providing to them now. So how long will that continue? How sustainable will it be in the long term? There's concern about the future labor supply, especially as the tourism sector ramps back up in reference to the jobs and the labor market that Jamie just spoke about. And there's concern about future cash flow problems. Looking at forecasting and managing visitor demand, that's a big one. There's a potential surge coming our way in visitors that will demand tourism goods and services, experiences, and are we ready for that? Can we scale up quickly enough? Can we deal with the concern from residents about public safety? And how could we position our tourism operators and our parks and recreation staff, city staff, other sectors for outdoor recreation and social opportunities? So Jamie's going to talk a little bit about the hardest hit sector, tourism, which we wanted to share a bit more information with you because that is going to not only had the biggest impact in the community, but it also will drive our response and recovery as well.
So yeah, again, COVID has had a profound and devastating impact on the tourism sector. The chart that you see on the screen illustrates our municipal and regional district tax funding, and this is currently the most consistent reported metric to help us understand tourism industry performance. So the chart shows us that after 12 years of consecutive growth, MRDT is down 26% year over year. So noting August has an outlier, which represents when all the deferral from February to July came through. Tourism Revelstoke has recently reported that this trend is continuing into 2021, as January saw an occupancy and revenue decrease of 60%. And so tourism really has great value to the provincial economy and our local economy. It's one of the largest employers, and it's one of the largest small business generators. And the tourism industry's recovery will be a key driver in our overall economic recovery. And as Ingrid mentioned, some of the key issues and challenges that our tourism operators will be facing is that cash flow planning and labor force planning. And these are really foundational to the success of our businesses over the medium to long term. And so with regards to response and recovery at a local level, the Tourism Revelstoke team has been working hard to help mitigate the impact of the pandemic, supporting local industry stakeholders as best they can with sector engagement and working on grant opportunities that will support the medium and long-term planning and recovery. And Tourism Revelstoke and the CED department are looking to spearhead a value of tourism study for Revelstoke. And what is a value of tourism study? It's developed through Destination British Columbia with their research planning and evaluation department. And this model is a program that provides a structured, consistent approach to estimate the volume and value of tourism in a community. Data gathered for Revelstoke will focus on 2019 to 2020 to really focus on 2019 being one of our peak years, and then seeing the impacts that we faced during 2020. So we feel like that's going to really give us a good understanding of the industry overall. And why are we doing this? A detailed study of this nature has never been completed for Revelstoke, and it's been determined as an essential tool needed to support local tourism and the industry going forward. This will really help give us, again, that baseline. And we do aim to build this study beyond the accommodations data. The DBC model is really based on accommodations data, but we see an opportunity to build a phase 2 and illustrate the full spectrum of the tourism industry, composition, and impact. And essentially, this project aims to help us better understand the value and the impact that tourism has in our community. The economic slowdown has sorry, Ingrid. I just wanted to just speak to the opportunity with the slowdown and the conversations that we're having in this building as a team to rethink how tourism contributes to our economy locally and our community and our long-term sustainability and resilience. Really, we need to, we're looking and asking these questions of how do we create a vision for a new tourism economy, and how do we create and sustain a visitor economy that tangibly enables our residents, businesses, and community to thrive, flourish, and be healthy in every way.
Thanks, Jamie. The Recovery Task Force has representation from different sectors, including tourism, arts and culture, childcare. So we've got a few other reports. We'll share some highlights with you. Arts and culture, of course, they're a driver of tourism. So the slowdown in visitation has definitely affected their ability to respond, to host shows, the public health orders. All of these issues have kind of impacted this sector. And wage subsidies for cultural workers are patchy, so similar to workers in the kind of the tourism economy. We're finding that workers in this sector are particularly vulnerable. But the good thing about some of the things we've learned through the pandemic is how to be more innovative in programming, how to focus on investment in cultural infrastructure, public art installations, and to look for long-term opportunities to support growth in this sector through innovation and just standing out from the crowd. So we've done an excellent job in that. Childcare sector is critical, not just for families whose children in school are maybe being sent home, during business closures, but it's critical to our labor supply. We're finding that as companies try to gear back up, especially in those vulnerable sectors, that they have a real challenge trying to find enough workers that are able to be reliably there day after day because they depend on childcare that's reliable. Another issue affecting this sector is the shortage of EC early childhood educators that Okanagan College is doing their best to try and rectify. So this is what we kind of come to at the final end of this presentation is what are we doing to respond, and how do we see our recovery unfolding in the future? So before Jamie takes over some discussion around programs and services, I'm just going to share with you what is core to our ability to respond as a community is a collaboration between different organizations in the community. And that includes, again, the partners at the BVIC, like the Chamber of Commerce, like Community Futures, Idea Factory. And they have been supported throughout this recovery process by the city's communications department. So I'm just going to skip ahead to show you some samples of what we have been able to produce through the city's communications. The newsletters have been 5 issued to date. Those are some examples of ones you've probably seen. And some of the tourism marketing work that's extraordinary has really kind of been collaborative in the sense that they are sharing, they're putting together videos that feature Mayor Sulz, they're putting together information and sharing information for Revy Rules to the Chamber of Commerce, the Mask Up campaign. So it's been quite a collaborative effort, and that's one of the really key advantages of being located the way we are with our business and business service partners. So back to economic response and recovery, I think Jamie's going to walk you through some of the programs and services being offered collectively, and then I'll talk finally about some of the infrastructure and investment in long-term resources and recovery.
So some key programs and services that have been supporting and will continue to support our business community at the local level, you can see in the column on the screen there. I'll go into a few more in detail. The digital transition and adaptation piece is really happening at a regional level and bringing it locally. So our tech coordinators supporting communications through the Provincial Digital Economy Rapid Response and Resiliency Program. And this is being facilitated by the Kootenay Association of Science and Technology and our Basin Business Advisors. So far we've had 12 businesses in Revelstoke be assisted through this program. And it's quite a variety of businesses that are accessing the support. We have accommodators, manufacturers, professional services, nonprofits, and retailers. There's also a really great collaboration going on with CAST and Selkirk College on regional tech company mapping. And part of this is helping us support tech business retention and expansion. And this does filter into workforce attraction and retention. And so speaking of retention, our business retention and expansion initiatives are happening on the ground, and it's been identified by the business development team that we can definitely approach this in a more robust way, seeing the variety of impacts on different industry sectors. And so the goal of any BRNE program is to create a healthy business climate. And again, this is not done alone or by one department or one person. It takes a collaborative team approach and a diverse set of skills, resources, and service providers. So we really plan on building this out in collaboration with our business organizations, partners, and the business community in the coming months. And this focus and effort will be critical as we plan a path forward for recovery and resiliency. And then when we look at investment and workforce attraction, these two initiatives are going to be gaining momentum at the regional level. And looking at merging social and economic development collaboration in this regard is really important. We see housing remains our biggest challenge in attracting new investment and labor force. And so this conversation at the regional level, and then again, we're hearing this at the local level, will be really valuable. And education and training, working with Okanagan College to identify opportunities for workforce development, upskilling, shifting needs of the business and the community. They're looking at some really fun, unique early childhood education programs, health worker programs, trades training, digital business application certification. So quite a variety of support with that workforce development piece through the college. And then the last point there with economic impact analysis, this can really range widely in our scope. And if and how we approach this still needs to be defined. It requires looking at both the direct and indirect effects of COVID on several economic levels. And the 2021 census data will likely really queue up an in-depth analysis for 2022. So in the short term, like Ingrid mentioned, we are trying to work with our data providers to see what's available now and how we can quantify this.
Thanks, Jamie. Last of all, the best way to, I guess, look at our long-term recovery is to spend and invest in our infrastructure and related resources. So I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of funding grants that we've applied for that'll be coming down the pipeline soon. Other infrastructure projects we're invested in right now is, of course, our Idea Factory and our fabrication lab that's almost built. We should be opening in May, June, hopefully. And the fabrication lab is already being out there, working to respond to industry needs in the wake of the pandemic, whether it's creating face shields or actually manufacturing lighting systems for stores to use. We'll have new programming to go with the new meeting space that will include some of the digital resources and adaptation that Jamie's mentioned. We'll be supporting co-working space. We'll be working with the OCP and Development Services on identified employment lands. We have an opportunity to develop our Section 16 land reserve into a tech park, which was identified about 7-8 years ago, I believe. And so we're starting discussions with the province on what that would look like, the process to bring it out of the Section 16 reserve and develop it into a tech park, although there are challenges being that there's not a serviced parcel of land at this point. Trail development, wayfinding signage, these are opportunities to leverage RMI investment and to support, again, trying to attract more visitors back to the community, to develop trails that get them safely outdoors, and the wayfinding strategy that allows us to just leverage all of that RMI money to cover off some of the key infrastructure costs that the city would be facing otherwise. Another one is backcountry recreation land use planning process that we are starting to kick off. We're in discussions now with the province and with different stakeholders, including First Nations, about what that process would look like. So that'll be coming your way over the next year or so. And then in terms of infrastructure grants and spending, the way that these tools, I guess, or this investment helps us out of through our recovery is job creation, tourism recovery, destination management, quality of life to attract those new residents, public health and safety with outdoor recreation opportunities, and supporting growth initiatives in new and emerging sectors. So these are all tools we'll be able to use to not just spend our way out of the pandemic, but actually to invest in long-term infrastructure, which will provide some relief to taxpayers as we can cover off some of the costs that would normally accrue to the city. So, warp speed presentation. Are there any questions?
Questions, councillors? Councillor Brooks Hill, you have a question? You have your hand up. Nope. Councillor Elliott?
Ingrid, you mentioned the funding applications sort of taking going into high production mode, but the federal government has just recently did a big announcement on transportation. They're going to throw a massive amount of money at infrastructure related to greening and mass transit. Have we sort of been talking with the engineer to start thinking about that plan?
We have had a lot of communication with the engineering department around transit, specifically around transportation infrastructure, not much more than actual trail development. Some of the applications for funding did look at specifically leveraging our RMI investment in our trail strategy within the city limits, and that will allow us to rebuild and to improve, to pave some of those infrastructure assets we have. As to roads, that would be a question more for Steve.
Yeah, I just know there was $30 billion. I was reading some article. There's $30 billion that the federal government's earmarked for greening our transportation, and I don't know.
Some of that
they're looking for projects.
Some of that certainly we've tapped into for our development of multi-use trails. It was part of our resort development strategy, connecting to the resort to the community. So we'll know more in the next few weeks, hopefully, about whether or not we receive the funding and to what amount that we receive.
Great. I have a bunch of questions, but should I carry on, or Gary?
Gary, you're muted.
Sorry, are they related to the presentation, Councillor Elliott?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Ask away.
So you said the various sectors of the economy are doing okay. I know the mill is doing, the forestry is doing well, the railway staying steady. In fact, improving the transportation stuff is going reasonably good. But the real dramatic impact is on our tourism and service industry in our town. And I know related to that is, I know the construction side is booming. And the reason of that is maybe it's something that needs to be investigated. Why is it booming?
Well, one of the short answers is that people are still investing long-term in tourism. they see that we are a really attractive destination, and they are betting that the recovery is going to be in our favor. You know, when we're competing even in the short term for that rubber tire traffic, we definitely have an advantage over other communities. There's also, you know, with the pandemic specifically, reference to that, again, that resident attraction, right? People are interested in moving to the community to, you know, set up shop and work from home on their digital career or whatever that looks like, and they can do that now. And we have the infrastructure to support that, and there's a huge demand from investors and from new potential residents that want to move and set up here.
Yeah. So quality of life and construction and tourism are all sort of very tightly related.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if we're going to start spending money on tourism, recognize that translates to construction jobs and housing jobs.
Yes. Well, again, some of the infrastructure grants we'll be getting is going to be invested in tourism infrastructure. That's flowed through the Ministry of Tourism, is specifically targeted at improving tourism infrastructure for those communities that are dependent on tourism traffic. And we're unique in that we have more of a diversified economy than a lot of tourism towns, but we are definitely going to be receiving some of that tourism infrastructure money. And while it can't necessarily build roads or the sewage lagoon, it can definitely be used to improve our tourism infrastructure, whether it's trails, additional public washrooms, facilities and amenities for travelers to enjoy, but also residents to improve their quality of life.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you, Ms. Braun, Ms. Mays. I appreciate your presentation and the work that the task force is doing, but more specifically what you're doing in our community with economic development. Thank you for that, and appreciate the work. All right, we're going to move on. We've got some letters ahead of us here. Revelstoke Chamber of Commerce has written a letter regarding illegal short-term rentals. They're wanting us to get this dealt with quickly. I think we're dealing with that with our short-term rentals that we've talked to today. So these are just communications that have come across. COVID-19 survey results for Black Press. They've given us a survey update. So as some of you have already talked about what's going on in our community with our businesses and how we're growing and that sort of thing, and what's been happening. So they've just given us some insights, things that we were cognizant of no matter what. So we've got that. Mr. Hopkins has written a letter supporting the micro home park project. We've talked about that and move that forward to staff. And then the BC Hotel Association, same thing. They're concerned about short-term rental regulations. And again, we've got that in the process. So is there any of you that have questions or any of those 4 items? Okay, seeing none, I'm just going to move forward. Do we have any questions from the press?
We haven't received any.
We haven't received any, and no one from the press is here. So we're going to move on. I'd like to move in camera pursuant to section 90.1 A, D, and I and K of the Community Charter. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Rind, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to move in camera and make sure that the recording is